finally, so this CZ kill could be everything. Finally, Zeus, he does something!
Looking for a second, he connects it. Oh, and he gets a third as well. Surely he's not going to pull this off. Oh, Caldera, the man, the myth, the beast.
Zywoo, no help really, but he's still hitting shots. He's already got 3. And 5. And oh my God, Zywoo! Unbelievable!
This episode of Revenge of By the Numbers with its new co-host is brought to you by eSportsBet, the industry's leading crypto odds matrix. They are running their World's Prediction Series 2 competition, which is free to enter. Go to the site, sign up, get some free DJT, start making predictions/bets in whatever direction you like. Maybe you'll follow some of the ones I suggest for you. And if you do well enough, the prize pool is 10 million USDT, first place 800,000 USDT. Obviously, if you like to bet, if you're considering betting, if you've never tried before, but you want to give it a go, eSportsBet is the company I'd recommend. Obviously, I'm not usually the person who introduces these episodes because the host was always Richard Lewis. In fact, he's the only person, as far as I know, who was on every single episode of By the Numbers. That's no longer going to be the case. Although, actually, I've already missed a few anyway, because I missed like one when it was like Carmack, and I think maybe I missed one more for some other reason. I think I was ill. Oh, there was those two when I was ill, when Anders and it was the other person.
Probably Moses.
Oh, Yanko. I think Yanko.
Oh, was it
Yanko?
Yanko?
He actually came and stood in for an episode. So anyway, let's not beat around the bush. The obvious elephant in the room is Semler's in the other box, not Richard Lewis, and this isn't a special guest episode with Semler. So first things first, Semler is now the new co-host of By the Numbers, but I've got to explain this. There's so much to unpack here. And by the way, I can't tell you everything about Richard's situation. That's Richard's situation. I only know what I know. So the first things first, the most important question is, why is Richard here? Obviously, because By the Numbers is Richard Lewis and Thorin. Right? First of all, this might actually sound a bit weird because, again, I'm not Richard Lewis, so I can't speak for him. But based on what he has said publicly, he did a stream. He basically says he is going to gradually remove esports from his life and his career as a result. And so he's going to finish up all his big stories. Like you see, he's finished up that esports Iron Curtain series. He's got obviously a load of match fixing type stuff still in the queue, things about people in the industry. He's going to finish those stories up, but he's not going to, in theory, I think, start up like new things for future years. And if you want to know the reason, this is why it'll be a bit confusing. Like, well, if he's not quit, because he hasn't just left immediately. That's the part that's been misunderstood. I know people heard the stream via quotes and they've just heard like, I'm quitting esports or I'm retiring. They think that means he's gone today. And like, why is he still here? Because of course, that's what a great industry it is. That your answer to why like one of the most legendary people ever stayed for one extra day was like, no, if you say you're leaving, just get out already. Like, I wonder why he's leaving, guys. Fucking hell, I wonder what it could be. So anyway, basically, he's just not going to be doing as much stuff anymore. And the reason, as a result, he's not doing By the Numbers, though, because you might think, why not wrap up this show, is because, first of all, you might know by the rebrand, we only did 3 episodes of Revenge of By the Numbers. Before that, the original show was By the Numbers. Then we had Return of By the Numbers when we had the Patreon. Now we have Revenge of By the Numbers. Now, first things first, understand this Patreon was closed down now. We are not anymore supported by a Patreon. We're now supported through the company that me, Monty, and are you ready? Richard Lewis were forming. So the problem is basically this: to do the honourable thing, because Richard now knows he doesn't want long-term to be involved in esports. Well, he was, unsurprisingly, because he was the owner of that company, he had equity in it, he was going to be paid per episode, etc. And we already had, because this is the way the real world of media works, I'm afraid, guys. We don't just get these sponsors 5 minutes before we get them. We had to pitch to these guys last year, and we had a whole slate of shows that we pitched them. And guess what? One of them, the flagship one of them, was, of course, this show. Of course, By the Numbers is one that, along with some of the insights, like guaranteed hits, isn't it? Super long running, the host, etc. So Richard didn't want to screw over me and Monty by coming in, starting out with his company, taking equity, doing a couple of shows, and then realizing he has to leave anyway. So he's done the honourable thing, and he's basically just told me, and this is the other key detail, because another question, which is a totally legit question, by the way, would be this: why not just make a new show with you and Semler then? Why call it By the Numbers? That's a very good question. And I agree with the sentiment, because if you notice in my career, typically that is what I do. I make shows with a specific co-host. I make the name and the branding. And if I ever have to, like, say I don't get on with that co-host or they leave the game, whatever, I make a new show, and I make a new show with that person, that brand. So there's 2 reasons, though, why it makes sense that we're going to keep Revenge of By the Numbers going, though. One is, as I alluded to before, we've already sold this to the sponsors. We actually have a certain number of episodes we must deliver as part of what we've agreed on our side for all the fucking Skrilla. So already he knows it'd be a bit awkward to have to go back to them and go, oh yeah, by the way, that show, one of those best shows we sold you, yeah, that doesn't exist anymore, but we're making a brand new show called Darren Semler Pull It Out of Their Ass. Can we have the money, please? Like, that doesn't look great. And then secondly, another detail, and this is a piece of trivia. This is just where being these sorts of story, you can always get out of jail. Here's what you guys don't know, because you're not super old school fans probably. If you actually go back to the original By the Numbers show, by the way, the early episodes are terrible because it actually was a show made by the sponsor. It was actually Alpha Draft at the time, a fantasy company. And the original show wasn't even a show like this. Because it was called By the Numbers, it really was a show where what we did each week is tell you, like, right, and if you, here's the fantasy team I'd take, like, this guy's sort of got to get a and by the way, it was terrible. That's why Richard
Holy man, I totally forgot.
Yeah. No one remembers this deep plot. Richard was the one, by the way, who was smart enough to realize, like, this isn't fun to do, and nobody's going to watch this week after week. So what he realized was just have the sponsorship be the branding, like your name's attached, but it be the coolest podcast in esports. And so what Richard figured out was this, whatever By the Numbers ended up being, this weird thing where me and him, this is why, by the way, it's tricky to bring a course, because I always say the reason that show worked is it's like me and him are just like tapped into the main line of esports itself, because we've got all these contacts and then we know all the esports news that's going on. And I've so many takes over the years. We always have an angle on something, and we always have like stories that connect to it. So it's put it this way, if people don't know, there's a reason this show didn't have guests. It's fucking tough, you know. It's not as easy as you think. Like, even people in the industry who are knowledgeable, maybe they only know their tiny part of the industry, or maybe they only know the game, or they only know players. They maybe don't know the industry or behind the scenes business stuff, etc. So it's a really complicated.
The only other people who could do it would be journalists who actually
there's not many
coming to them as well.
Yes,
that's the thing. You get to a certain level of notoriety as a journalist, and then the people are coming to you with the story. You're not having to go to them. All of a sudden, you wake up and you got your DMs filled with, oh, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening.
That's actually a very misunderstood detail in the industry. You know, it's where all the people who are like the Twitter egg, like anonymous leakers, it's where fans don't get it, because they think like, but if that ends up being real, isn't his info legit as yours? No, because that guy is like a guy on the beat hustling, sniffing out, messaging everyone, oh, what's going on, what's going on? As Semler says, when you actually get to the level of me and Richard, here's how you find out something's happening. People just DM you it directly, sometimes like the player involved, like their team, because again, they also know, by the way, you're going to get the info anyway, so sometimes they want to adjust how you get it and what you think of it and add in their own little fucking 2 cents. So anyway, to rewind it, there is actually a piece of deep law, which is when the original By the Numbers was ending in 2016, because Richard also chose to leave. That was actually when he was going to do E-League, if you remember. And if you remember when he went to E-League, he sort of shut down a lot of stuff. He didn't take sponsors because he had that whole vision, if people don't know, where that was like, I don't know how much to talk about this. That was his sort of off-ramp, if you don't get know, guys.
That's what he thought.
He was going to gradually transition, fully enough, out of esports then, but to like real TV. By the way, he would have been brilliant. I think it would have been a great lineup for him. It just turns out fighting games ruined that for him. So who the fuck knows? But anyway, the point is, if we roll it back, when he was going to leave, at the time, the sponsor originally told us they would re-up, right? So I had the same problem. It was like, I'm here, the sponsor wants a show, but Richard's left. So if people don't know, the actual co-host at the time we'd agreed was going to take over was Moses. If people don't know, that was back obviously when me and Moses were doing E-League. It's just what happened was the sponsor actually decided in the coming months not to re-up. And so instead, me and Moses, just as I said, when I didn't have a sponsor, I did make a show. I just took my original Counterpoints brand, if you remember, which was basically at the time, like I just put together a panel of people and talk about whatever I want, whenever. There was no schedule to it, no like set theme or whatever. I just took that and made that the Me and Moses podcast instead of By the Numbers. So anyway, that's a long roundabout way of talking about why this is still called Revenge by the Numbers. But here's the angle though. So we'll talk in a second about Richard, because that should, by the way, obviously be the first topic of Revenge by the Numbers without Richard Lewis. Is where the fuck's Richard Lewis, and isn't it a big deal he's leaving? But before we do, the one thing I would say we'll address a little bit now is, what is this show going to be now? Because here's the other thing I am utterly cognizant of. Obviously, Semler is not Richard Lewis, for good or for ill. So as a result, this shouldn't be the same type of show, in my opinion. It would be a mistake to try and make the same type of show, because as we just sort of talked about, Richard is a very unique character. If people don't know, by the way, I'll even fully say this. There would be times, by the way, where like, because another thing people never understood about me and Richard Semler is they always thought that we are like literally best friends, and we like, you know, like we're like the fucking odd couples and we're just like message each other all the time. I don't think they realize it. Me and Richard are the sort of people who are just like hermits who just live absorbing the internet. But we actually almost never message another bit. In fact, you're one of the few people I ever even fucking call mate. So as a result, they don't know this. But so I would even myself look forward to By the Numbers for that reason, because I would always think like, I can't wait to see what Richard's take on this like Nyholm info I've got for him or something. Like that would be the shit. So here's the thing though. What I thought was this: when I was thinking of other hosts, obviously, as I alluded to, you're going to have to take it in a different direction. So the angle we're going to go with on Semler here is this. Obviously, Semler can do the in-game stuff. He has followed the game for very many years, but this is the key part. It's actually one of the best reasons I think to do it. One, we just recently had that whole, like, I think people enjoyed the camaraderie and the sort of rapport on Pop Flash. We sort of test run the premise there. But the bigger issue for me is this. And this might sound like a wild way to say it, but because you essentially yourself have extricated yourself from the esports landscape, you know, you were pushed a little bit as well as you jumped. You know, there's a bit of both.
It was definitely.
There's a bit of both.
I often wonder, waking up in the morning,
exactly.
Which was it?
Yes.
Did I feel the nudge or did I leap? I
could be a bit of both.
A slight push.
Yes. So since that's happening to you, I also thought to myself, well, remember the other side of By the Numbers. While from Richard, it's purely a journalistic perspective. It's also the idea that you talk about the big topics in the space that sometimes go beyond the game. Things like ESL, the Saudi Arabian connection, companies getting bought by China, like putting in place all restrictions and stuff. These are some of the bigger topics that, in my opinion, actually were sometimes the most important things By the Numbers talked about. So while I can't give you the Richard Lewis journalistic perspective, I can only give you mine. Semler himself is an industry veteran. He's been behind the scenes for all these years, and crucially, because he's actually extricated himself, he can basically sort of go off a little bit more than he might have done in the past.
I can just say what I want.
You can be pretty free with what you think about these topics, right?
Oh yeah, no, like that's the thing. And I mean, for those of you who don't know, like I'm doing this in the mornings on my stream as well, where I just kind of like give my thoughts on everything. And that's pretty much exactly what it is now, is just because I've kind of taken that step back. I don't have any current contracts with any of the TOs right now because they're doing long-term contracts now all of a sudden, when apparently, you know, that wasn't a thing. Now
interesting how that works in it. I know.
Now they're trying to go back into multi-year deals. So, okay. So now it's like, if you don't get that signing block, it's not, oh, come back in a month. It's come back in 6 months to a year. And maybe, you know, something will be there. So even if I wanted to work with the TOs, I can't work with the TOs right now, unless they were to come to me for like some random thing. Right. So
yes.
At the point it is right now, I just kind of get to sit back and enjoy the show with everybody else and really, you know, speak my mind. I never really held back too much in the past.
Yeah,
I wasn't really playing the political game when I took interviews. I always spoke my mind pretty much. Like, it's not really changing. It's just that now even if I cared about ESL, I don't have to care about ESL in that sense, or Blast, you know. Carried Blast's water in the past, of course, as a professional. That's
another thing I hadn't even thought about as well. The other thing that obviously restricts other people in the industry is, like, we essentially, partly through doing this show, Semler, me and Richard did have this very bizarre relationship with like tournament organizers that we would simultaneously work with while incredibly criticizing and sometimes even saying like they're pieces of shit, like they're fucking like that. If people don't know, this is also where I'll never ever get the credit of Mark Ray, mate. People think I'm just a moron bull in a China shop just flailing out. Like, there's an art to that, guys. How do you think I keep getting hired by the same fuckers? Like, you have to walk a really fine line when you do that. So as you say, though, like, most of the people won't even talk about some of those topics because they just know, like, you're just gambling, not getting hired.
Yeah, I think I've kind of crossed that line now. I think I've now managed to piss off enough people, because when I criticize because towards the end of last year, when I started actually, you know, speaking out a bit about the AnyKey bullshit that was moving in with ESL and all that, you know, and I was really tired. Because what's sad is that I think I screwed up how I put forth my message on that. Because what I was annoyed about was the hypocrisy of ESL. You know, they're framing it as this message. This is what we think. You know, men are toxic, whatever, and they're holding women back. And that's what I had beef with. But then everybody's takeaway from that was, oh, Semler hates women and he doesn't want there to be women esports. And I was like, how did that even happen? Like,
here's the thing, though, man.
Things up so bad that's the takeaway that everybody has, is that, you know, because I've never said anything against a female. That's
the problem, mate. I think that's why I don't buy it. Here's the problem. I've seen this happen too many times. It's happened to me too many times. In my opinion, that's just pure gaslighting. Those people know you are not someone who hates women, by the way. They just know that's the best way to dismiss everything you said. And so what they did was essentially, same thing happened to me, was they themselves just ran out ahead like some sort of fucked up SJW Paul Revere, going like, the women haters, the misogynists are coming. And then what happened was, if people don't know, thousands of women, and bizarrely gay people for some reason had to include themselves in this. I don't know why. Like, this isn't really like a fucking tag team fat battle here, boys. But anyway, these certain groups online that all collate together with the flags and the acronyms, they all rushed to all say, what the hell? This guy hates women and/or gays and basically they weren't even reacting to me and Semler. They were reacting to what they'd heard in their show. So as a result of that point, Semler, I don't think you can really be held responsible. Like, I agree. No. Look, the one area I would say is this, because this is where I sometimes know I have fucked up myself. Go ahead. I would say Twitter's not the medium for it. That's the only thing I would say. Because, like, here's the problem. even if you had done it as a stream, by the way, those people wouldn't have watched the stream and they still would have held the same opinion.
No.
But I do agree, there are certain people who are just slightly less crazy who actually might have watched and be like, oh, it's just quite how this, like, you might have gotten a little bit of clemency, as it were.
There were a few things afterwards that came. Well, I was talking about it every morning on my stream, and I was answering all questions on the stream.
Right.
So as I'm tweeting, I'm just like, hey, people are showing up in my chat. They're being like, why do you hate women or whatever the fuck? And then I'm just like, listen, this is the point of view, right? So on my stream, I'm able to explain the reasoning behind my messages. But this was right in terms of like how I use Twitter. I screwed up because I shouldn't have done individual tweets. I should have done a chain.
Yeah.
If I ever decide to just, start the morning with napalm again, it's going to be a chain of tweets that are all tied to one another. So you can't just like land on it and be like, oh, this is just an independent thought. This wholly encapsulates everything he has to say.
Yes.
Like, no. I need to actually make it so that here's the tweet and then follow the chain down. And so that it's all nice and neat and do it that way. Because I really like what I've ran into, even talking with friends afterwards, where I was like, listen, like, what do you think about this thing? How did I screw up? And they're like, well, I saw that tweet. And I thought that was pretty, you might have crossed the line. And I'm like, oh, but did you see the other tweets that were explaining? They're like, no, I didn't know, and so right there, that's the issue. It's like, if they miss the other tweets, then they just see the,
by the way, there's another thing
or whatever, right?
There is no line. The line is arbitrarily thought up after the fact and then applied. So I'll give you an example. When people talk, like, because here's the thing, I know exactly what you're referring to, Sam. The two ones they always go to is the when are the men only tournaments joke and the joke of like pronouns in bio, which, by the way, Ryan at Rushby Media, you are a bitch. I don't care what's in your bio. Don't worry about that. Yeah, don't even worry about what's in your bio. Mate. Yeah, in your case, we're mainly just laughing at you. There's actually people who might put their pronouns in, we might totally respect, probably even use the pronouns, but for you, nothing, you piece of shit. So, okay, once we've got that to the side, here's what I would say though, right? Because I agree, yeah, obviously those tweets made you look bad, blah, 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 all the rest of it. But that's also where this is just bad faith. Like the idea that's a line and you've just said some crazy statement. No. In the same drama, if people don't know, a professional female player for Dignitas dismissed me and Semler's opinion on the basis we are white, straight men. Yeah. Right? If that's not over the line, then what we're saying is well behind the fucking line, boys. We're on a fucking love seat having a cocktail, watching her be right at the line, pushing her face against it all the time like that.
No. She did the right thing though, because today how it works is that so long as you say white first, right, you're allowed to say whatever you want after that. Okay. And that's totally fine. Okay. So long as you add white, whatever, it's cool. You're good. You're not racist or anything. It's totally fine.
I just like the way she genuinely did the fucking. They're also beyond parody. She just did the meme of like, you're a white male. Like, why is that the go-to? Like a fucking abstract discussion about like gender in esports and how do we make them better? Like, you're a white male. It's like, by the way, spoiler, if anyone doesn't know, here's another way this show will slightly change, which is a lot of people might not know this, but Richard has this thing about the way he presented himself publicly, where on the one hand, he will lean into stuff like complaining about haters, but he always has like that moment of lucidity where he sort of realizes like, oh, I sound a bit bitter now. So he would always, if you remember, be like, he would like jokingly be like, oh, this opening segment is petty grievances. Obviously, that's the end of that segment or whatever. I have to understand, fans, I never had a limit to the petty grievances. Like, I would have had whole episodes that would just keep going. So now you have to understand that it's back on the menu.
It can pop off at any point. It's not a segment. It's it's a part of the show.
Exactly.
And I'm perfectly happy to just shoot the shit and get after it with everybody. Like, it doesn't really matter at this point. I mean, we might as well, like, if we can be the conscious in the sense we can try and at least of
what do you think of that though? Because like I say, my vision of how we reshape this is the way it stays the same is, as I said, it's the show that can actually address the big topics, and especially the like, here's the problem. In the modern day, we have now entered some like Orwellian world where there are these enormous elephants in the room and no one can talk about them. Like, the craziest thing of all to me, dude, is like, I genuinely would never have predicted what happened now with the ESL Saudi Arabia stuff. What I actually thought, genuinely, me and Richard even had a little powwow about this. I thought actually, if you know SJWs, the next move was this, Samler. They would claim that by referencing Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, that we were Islamophobic. That would be the new angle. I thought they were going to go with something like that. Instead, if people don't know, nobody replies to any of our tweets. Nobody ever addresses the topic. None of the women in the space ever say the word Saudi Arabia. No one ever mentions who owns ESL. There are just these weird, odd journalists that do it, and that's it. Every now and then, it's like people keep sort of every now and then going like, is no one going to talk about this elephant here? But then everyone else just goes, and then
but it's the exact same thing again. All along. It was the same working for Blizzard. It's the same. You see it with all the Riot guys.
Oh, for sure, yes.
Where
the China stuff was always like that. Yes,
anything to do with Riot, Hong Kong, China, any of that, you can't touch it with the 10-mile stick. And that's just the reality of whether you want to keep working with these companies or not. I mean, you can, but you have to be straight, and it's really hard to be honest in a space like this, because you're thinking, well, if I were to say anything at all, well, that could be the end of my contract tomorrow, and odds are it will be the end of your contract tomorrow.
Oh, it will.
So they are operating, but then it's just like, okay, fine, fair enough, and they leave it at that. The thing is that I also, and fair enough, I also know people who are just like, yeah, I don't say anything, and I don't care. Like,
exactly.
I just want to talk about Counter-Strike, or I want to talk about League, or I want to talk about whatever, and I don't care about any of the other stuff. I just want to get paid to talk about League. And I'm like, fair enough.
Yeah, just do you.
Just do you. There you go. Right. That's fine and all. But it is, I don't know. It's kind of hard to like walk it back. And I know that it's so cliche to use the Matrix meme, but it really is hard to like walk it back once you start actually like paying attention to how all this stuff stacks up. And you're like, you can't unsee it at that.
Dude, that's the thing I can't handle, because it's like Frankie was just like, we're out the Matrix. Like, look, we're never going to go there. And then the next thing you know, she's just cramming blue pills and like, what are you talking about? I never said anything. Back in the Matrix.
Yeah, I don't know, man.
Anyway, right, well, what we'll do then, let's pivot a second, because I actually think, like I said, the first topic is actually the reason this show exists, which is Richard Lewis is leaving fucking esports. Like, I don't think people realize, even if it's gradual, even if he wraps up his stories, like, for me, this genuinely is like a fucking, like, this is like a chapter hinging moment in the fucking history of esports. Because as much as people are going to think stuff similar, I know this is why they got mad at my, like, I am esports tweet. Their whole thing's like, yeah, but you know, like, there would still be games and tournaments without you. It's like, there would, but it wouldn't all be the same though, would it? Like, in my case, the history wouldn't be told the same way. Even, by the way, analysis wouldn't be the same. The style of banter wouldn't be the same. So if when you talk about someone like Richard, I don't think fans understand what an enormous impact he has on the way news is done. Like, for example, he really has become, as much as you should never, like, you know, just universally trust one source. If Richard Lewis writes something, Keyword writes it in a written report about something, you know that is the gold standard in esports. That, you know, that will have all the facts are nailed down. When did you ever see anyone do like a rebuttal article that showed he was lying, or like, you've never seen it? It's never happened. And by the way, you think that tons of people don't want to do that. There are people horny as fuck to take Richard down. The point is, you can't take people like me and Richard down. That's why people have to waste their fucking time on stuff like joke tweets. That's the thing. We haven't got anything legit you can take us down for. All our skeletons are fully out on display, still being fucking puppeted by all the cunts from years ago when we made those jokes. So, like, I actually think people are really because here's the problem. At the moment, they haven't really lost him, have they? He's still doing his articles. He's still doing some video. So I think they think like, oh, so it's just going to be like this, like slightly quiet. It's like, the problem they haven't thought of, Semler, is this. What happens next year when something like this happens? Like, what if, for example, like, some more like Russia sanction shit comes down, or there's like, you know, fucking Saudi Arabia buys all of CSGO. Like, when that happens, that's the moment I'm going to be like, I wish Richard Lewis was there.
Well, that's the thing. The scene, like the trap that people fall into, this is what I've noticed, and myself included. Like, I had this kind of like megalomaniac kind of thing going on for a while, where it's like, I have to be in the scene, you know, and I have to keep doing this sort of stuff. And you quickly like, I don't know if you quickly realize it. Some people fight against it for a while, but you realize that the scene's going to keep going without you, dude. Whether you're in the scene or not, it's going to keep going without you. The scene will progress. You are not the linchpin that you think you are. You are not the difference maker, whatever. That being said, for certain individuals, the scene will be poorer. So it's not going to stop going. The scene will continue to be there. But like you say, who's going to write those hardcore articles? Who has got the network that Richard has after how long? 15, 20 years in the space? You know, like, who has got that kind of network with people, you know, messaging him the details so that he can craft the article that's actually going to give you all of the links, everything in it. You read one of his articles, it's just hyperlink after hyperlink after hyperlink to all of the different things, tying it all together, bringing it all together. And then I'll go to another website and read an op-ed or something, and it's just a wall of text. No links, no references, no nothing. This is what I think, and here's and it's just like, well, why do you think this? You know, can you give us any kind of context or anything? No. So if that's going to be the future, we are going to be poor for it. And that's the real shame that'll happen, right? Like, it's not going to stop the scene. The scene will continue going, clearly, because now they just got $1.5 billion injected into it. So it's like, the scene's not going anywhere. There's money.
Sure.
It's just, it's going to be a poorer scene because we're not going to actually have guys like Richard who are connected and who can actually write that story. And also, I think, really, who are willing to take the hate.
Oh,
and
for sure.
That's going to wear you down. It wears everybody down eventually. And you see it in mainstream. And
I'm sure you had the same thing, Samuel, when you were going through that shit at the beginning of the year, like I was. You get people who reach out to you with super legit people. Sometimes even, by the way, women in the industry who themselves like don't agree with the way people are talking. And they'll always send the same message every time, don't they? They're sort of like, look, I sort of agree with you, but I don't want to say anything because I don't want to and you're like, I don't blame you.
I don't blame you. Exactly. Yeah. Look at what's happening. Like, that's the reason why these people act the way that they do with these mobs.
Yes.
It just serves a deterrence. It's like Like, look at what happens to you if you actually question anything. Look at what happens to you if you don't just go along with it blindly. If you actually try and ask a question or maybe point something out that doesn't add up, you know, we will send a mob to you and just swarm you. So your social media, we're just going to take it out on you. And so obviously, of course, it acts as a deterrent. And I totally get it. I had people who were just like, listen, I agree, but I'm not going to say anything. And I'm like, fair enough, it's fine. In a way, it's actually good enough to just know that I'm not crazy and that there are people who agree.
Oh, for sure.
You know, because if there's nothing and you're just on your own and you're not getting,
no, it's easy to feel like
you start going like.
The joke is, you feel like you're the last. You're just in the fucking bunker at that point. If you know the reference, you're just like, that's the fucking end, isn't it? Like, it's me versus the world now. Fucking hell. And here's the thing, though. The other thing people will miss is this as well, Samler. Everyone's going to think there's a ridiculous statement, but it's true. The other thing about Richard was this as well. He was never actually involved in any questionable drama about his ethics. Now, understand, I didn't say any drama. Obviously, there's loads of Twitter drama because, like me, a million idiots have figured out I could use my chance to contact someone to irritate them and get a rise out of them. And sadly, there's that happening a million times. But beyond, like, did someone block someone or what did they say? That's not, by the way, understand, if you think that's important, you aren't important. Like, that's the most meaningless shit, by the by, pointless, like, Twitter drama ever. But you have to understand, Richard was never involved with drama. Like, think even of that thing with Nell. That was like 2 months ago, 3 months ago, where the guy basically like utterly fucked up a story, got details completely wrong, and in doing so had potentially put, I'm being serious, guys, the livelihood and maybe life of a fucking young Russian player on the line over nothing. Richard's never been in scenarios like that. In fact, the other way around, the other thing that you won't realize if you're a fan is, you think Richard just wrote the news or reported. You know how many times he was in the news, as in he was behind the scenes? I'll give you an example. Go read that statement Peacemaker made when he just came out and said his ban was removed. You'll notice he says in there, he thanks Moses, Richard Lewis, I can't remember, like Zeus or someone, like a few people that he knows in esports, basically. Spoiler, I would have been on that list if I'd have replied to him. But you know what? Didn't feel like replying to anyone Brazilian that month, the month of May. Let me think it through, you dickhead. So anyway, so I told him, fuck it, I'll reply like 3 weeks, mate. It was too late by then. But the point is, that's what also happens, Semler. There's another reason I get cheesed off with pro players coming at me and being shitty to me. Because these motherfuckers DM me when they're in trouble. I'm not the police. Like, they'll DM me when they're not getting paid their salary or they're getting fucked up by team. Why should I care, mate? I'm just supposed to be a drama whore here to
and
fucking
they turn around and shit on you the next day. You're like, oh.
But the reality is, when they need help, me and Richard especially, by the way, these are the people these guys go to. So there's another area that, especially like pros and people behind the scenes, they're massively going to miss him in that regard because you shit out of luck. You're just going to be dealing with these companies. You're also, by the way, another thing I'll say as well, I'm trying not to say too much stuff Richard might not want him to say himself, but I know he'd be fine with this. Another thing Richard would sometimes do is he's different from me in this sense. If I have info and I think you're fucked up, what you're doing is wrong, I am sort of like some fucked up Don Quixote character who just goes publicly and just goes, you are wrong and this is not allowed. Everyone, we have to stop him. Richard, by the way, he has more now. So he's a lot better at Game of Thrones than I am. Like, what Richard would often do is he'd have the dirt on the person who's fucking with someone and he would go to them privately and he'd basically tell them, like, you're going to put this right and you're going to tell this person it's not going to happen and you're not going to say anything publicly. And then this story maybe doesn't get revealed in this way. He would use it like as a force for good in a way, but he also like knew social dynamics a bit. And basically what he knew was the best way to fight like that is to make it so there is no drama, it's all dealt with privately, but you get the result you want in the end, you know. So
this is
he had a different approach to me, guys. Yeah,
he's all about that settlement outside of court, right?
So basically, he's another guy where you just don't know how many battles he won. You only know the ones he had, like they got officially put on the scoreboard at the end, where the person kept playing the match in public and then he got the win on them. You don't know how many times behind the scenes he helped players. And as you say, by the way, he's told the story in the past. I think he might even reference the names, but I won't say them just in case people don't know now. But there have been literal pro players who he helped out, sometimes after having money stolen, and then publicly they came out and were just like, Richard Lewis is lying. And they just did what their boss said or whatever. Like, I don't, this is why people don't get it. You know, one thing people often do in my career in esports, Semlers, if I do something brilliant, they'll just go, what do you expect? It's his job. None of the things we're talking about now are anyone's job requirement, by the way. Like, you don't have to go help people like that. You don't have to go and embroil yourself in someone else's fucking behind the scenes scenario with a company. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You do that, by the way, if you care. That's the only reason you do it. If you actually care about the people involved in the scene, you want the scene to be a better place, which, by the way, that's another thing we should bring to now. I've got a question for you. Do you think this is just Richard Lees, or do you actually think is this sort of like the canary in the coal mine moment? Like, is this sort of, because I get the vibe Richard's on the same kind of path me, you, and people like Monty are. It's like, even if we're not explicitly leaving like he is, we're all sort of phasing certain parts. Here's the thing, I don't ever say esports because esports is my life. I've spent so long doing it. I'll probably always have an interest in it. But I always do say I am trying to quit the esports industry though. Like, I want to be on my channels and I want to have my company and I want to have my people like you and me who work on shows and I bring my guests on, but I don't want to go on other people's shit. I don't want to work for any of those dickheads for day rates. And I definitely don't ever want for 1 second in my life to have to worry about saying the actual truth that I genuinely believe in as a good person trying to change the world because I have to be scared some evil fuck owns everyone in the industry. I'm never going to ever let that worry me, by the way, guys. I'm always going to say my shit. So spoiler, I already would be sort of slightly squeezed out of esports, but I'm leaving anyway in that regard. And by the way, there's another angle they don't get, which is, I agree, for events, it's different because you're purely on camera. Behind the scenes, if people don't know, one of the whole things that these evil fuckers now in esports want to do is to get people like me and Richard all on side because they know if they get us, it provides like a level of fucking like status to them. Like, oh, there must be something legit, or maybe they're not so bad. Or even worse, and this is one of the reasons I'll never take this Audi money, is the angle of like, well, everyone has to do it in the end. We've all got to earn a living and we've all got... I don't want to believe that's true. I don't believe it's true. In fact, to the extent that if that is the only option, I will just leave the esports industry. I might still be a weird little guy from England doing videos on YouTube, but I will not be in the industry anymore. I don't want that fucking money. You can keep it, shove it up your ass.
Oh, it's such a, it's where it gets really, really messy in terms of like who, it's not easy to make a buck in esports. It really is not easy to make a buck in esports. Like most of these companies are deep in the red, running off of VC, or in ESL's case, you know, ESL with the Saudi money coming in, but they were owned by MTG. MTG were trying to sell them for years. They couldn't even find a buyer.
Yes.
They were
losing millions and millions every year, tens of millions.
They were just losing money hand over fist. And all they were doing was trying to restructure DreamHack, restructure ESL, figure out how we can sell them, who we can sell them to. And they could not find a buyer. And so at the end of the day, it's like why I didn't necessarily go too hard against the ESL guys in particular, because I don't think they had much of a say. I think it was really just MTG who were just like, right, we found a buyer.
Yes.
Great. Bye guys. Peace. We're out of esports. It was a good run. It was great while it lasted. Best of luck to you. Peace. Good luck. You know? And I was, so again, it was just like, well, it sucks for the virtue signalers or the people who speak really loud on social media on certain topics, because obviously for them, it's like, you know, they may have to be able to sleep with themselves at night now, knowing that they're getting paid, you know, their salary comes from a certain source that may conflict with their values. It doesn't seem like any of them are losing much sleep over it. I don't know. They're still around, but it is what it is. In regards to what you said about like taking distance, that's definitely the case now. Like, I'm super happy I'm so honored that you would bring me on for this show, because it is, as far as I'm concerned, it is the CS show. Like, by the numbers, if I'm going to tune in for news, when I was taking my step back, you know, I'm like, okay, you know, there's a couple of shows that I'll listen to here and there. By the numbers is one of them. And so, you know, to be able to come on here and co-host with you is rad. And that's really just the way that I want to go forward, is working with people that I want to in the industry. And that's pretty much it, right? Like being able to do side projects or small tournaments or stuff like that, or working with you, you know, in that sort of thing, where it's like, we can speak our mind. We don't have to worry about like, if I say something, is Blast going to take my contract away? Or ESL or these other ones, right? You know, because that is a reality where a caster or an analyst or a host or any of the people who survive on events, that's where they live. That's why we were always so jealous of you. You know, you in particular, actually, you and Richard, but like you were so sharp about that, getting ahead of the ball and creating your own content and having your own platform and putting in the work to build that, because it gave you autonomy in a way that us casters and analysts and all that never could have, because we were just totally reliant on the TOs. So if the TO did something, shut up and take it, because that's your lunch. That's how you get paid. Whereas you always had that autonomy. You always had the TO, you always had your YouTube channel and everything else on the side that was so sick. So I think that's definitely like the direction to go in the future, if you want to be able to speak your mind on anything that's going on in the scene. Because if you're reliant now on ESL, who have essentially swallowed 80% of the scene, or Blast, who are the other 20%, basically, apart from PGL, who host a major every now and again. That's it. And I know, like, if you don't agree with anything they say, well, if you ever want to work again in CS, well, you better shut up, because those are the only two companies you're working with. That puts you in a really awkward spot. Now you really are in that position of just shut up and take it. And that, you know, some people, fine, that's what they want to do. But that is something where it's like, I'm not totally on board with it. And I think I've made that clear with my position online.
By the way, if people don't know, because I just know the news stories that we're talking about here, basically, the ESL, one way or another, was going to be sold to some evil fucks. Like, if people don't know, the original story, I think it was the beginning of 2020, even before we did Flashpoint, was that they were going to be sold to like one of those streaming companies from China. So, yeah. And spoiler, I'll just say this in case people are from like League of Legends and really don't know this. Any massive company in China just has connections to the government. That's how it works. Like,
everything.
You know how everyone was trying to say that about Russia, like, oh, and all the oligarchs have connections to Putin. It's like, you fucking moron. You just don't know how it works in every other country. Like, spoiler, it's not that different in fucking America. Like, the question is just what level of scale. The point is, if you were a company that was equivalent to like essentially, you think Twitch doesn't have connections to the government. They're bloody Amazon, you morons. Of course they do. Like, the point is, everywhere does this, but in China in particular, that is just basically like the unspoken rule. Of course they have connections. That's why, by the way, they let you operate. Remember, they're sort of like a like fucking market economy where they decide things and plan it all. So basically, one way or another, if you were a virtue signaler, you were always making your own grave for yourself, except sadly, we all know you didn't, because this is the last thing I'll say. We'll actually start talking about some CS, but really the sad thing is this. What you learned about the virtue signalers is that they were just virtue signalers, as in that was it. Like, there wasn't anything behind it. There wasn't a real principle. What you saw when they complained, that was it. That was the act. The act was emotionally manipulate you into thinking they're a better person than they are on the basis of what they propose is the principle they live by. But when they actually got a chance to show how they live, when change happened, they bow down and they don't do what their principle says. This is a key point to make, Samler, because I'll give you an example. I'll actually tell you a funny side angle. He won't care that I say this, right? When I first said all that shit when we did Flashpoint about how I won't ever work with ESL again until they name and fire the people who took all those EPL slots from the NA teams, right? Because at the time, I was investing my life and potentially the rest of my career into running leagues and trying to get the best things for players. So I remember thinking, like, that is utterly unacceptable. You can't just steal people's spots and then I'll work your event. What, and I'm going to be on your event and be like, and of course, this team in Pro League, maybe even a team that had the slot stolen for them. Like, I can't do that, mate. I won't do that in good conscience. But when I made that statement somewhere, when I said, I won't work with ESL, and then I said the reasoning why I even give conditions that you have to name and shame the people and fire them, the people who made them sit, like, you understand, I did know saying that I'm like doing the Cortez, burning the ships. Like, there's no way back from that. Like, they're not going to fire the people so they can hire Thorin, by the way. But in saying that, I'm actually accepting the consequence. And I'm like, we'll go years and I won't ever have any income from ESL. I won't work their major events. If they get the majors, the next 5 majors, no more majors for me, right? That's the cost. It's only when you actually have to start paying that cost that you actually can reflect, was it worth the statement? Now, it was in my case. Sadly, I think most of these people, when they get the tiniest pushback, they're like, oh, wait, I just thought this was like getting free points and like love. I didn't know, like, there's not like a cost for this. What the fuck? This is all free, right?
That's for a lot of these people. That's all it is. It's just make the appropriate noises so that I look like I'm part of the crowd. Sure. And whatever the thing is, the current thing, just go along with that, right? That's how you get your likes. That's how you get your. And I think actually, again, bringing it full circle back around to Richard in this article that he's released, because that's the beauty of it, is that he's not totally done. He's still got his op-eds coming out. He's still got his pieces coming out. But I think he nailed it. He nailed it with this, with the virtue signaling around Ukraine, the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, and how he just goes down this article and there's just link after link. This team, their social media posts, their social media posts, their social media, and you can just look and it's just likes and comments and blah, blah, blah. But all it's just going to be like the current thing. This is whatever it is. We're just gonna throw some social media out there real quick and then move on. Because of course Richard then goes on to show how it's hypocritical and how they weren't maintaining the standard.
Let's talk about this article then. We'll make this the first transition. Sure, so obviously Richard's doing a series. It's called the Esports Iron Curtain, in sort of like similar to the video I made back when the conflict first started in like February or whatever. And basically the premise of it is he's outlining how, like, once the conflict began, how the sanctions began to be applied and but one of the key points he makes, and this is something I found very alarming as soon as I heard they were putting sanctions on certain teams. So people might know Virtus Pro, Gambit, obviously Virtus Pro became outsiders for the tournaments. Gambit sold their players. Now I'll just say this for the sake of technical accuracy. They sold their players to a Norwegian talent agency who then sold them to Cloud9. But it's convenient how that happened, isn't it? It's almost like Cloud9 wanted them anyway. You can see what I think. So anyway, right? What the key point is this. these other massive organizations, by virtue of being so large scale, these are obviously some of the best teams in Counter-Strike, got punished for having these top Counter-Strike teams, but being Russian owned or connected with oligarchs or having sponsors that are oligarchs or energy companies with those connections. Because remember, by the way, do I even need to say this? If normal companies have connections in China to the government and in Russia to the government, do you think energy companies don't? Do you imagine they're the ones like, oh, it's like an ice cream truck, just let him go around, like, you know, your fucking mind, like those pipelines. Spoiler, that's what half the shit's even fucking about, if you bother following these stories. So anyway, right, one of the points he made, which is a very apt one, I even thought the same thing myself, was when we were at the major seminar, one of the teams I was following, they were actually quite a canny little upset team. They looked like they were going to make it to the top 8 and everything, was Forza, of course, the team that have always been like the king of tier 2 in Russia. Now, if people don't know, one of their main sponsors the whole time is Lukoil. And as far as I know, they have those connections themselves. But bizarrely, and no one's ever, this is why, by the way, you need shows like this. And crucially, you need Richard Lewis and this work. Because where is the platform? Like, where is the sort of like White House press thing where I can go and go, excuse me, Mr. ESL, why is Forza allowed to play in your tournaments, even though, like, there's no way you can do that, by the way. Like, you have to just create that news yourself or get the person on record. So I actually find that disgraceful, the idea that, because it wasn't just them, they were the most famous example. As far as we can tell, there were a bunch of teams, especially if you expand it to like the online qualifier before the major, there will have been a bunch of teams that had these connections. And basically all you've done is capriciously fuck over VP and Gambit because they're too good. They're just too good at the game. So because they're really good, they get banned. And then the others just get to fucking play in the tournament anyway. Yeah, you realize you haven't sent a message there. The message you've sent there is like, I'll just fucking capriciously fuck with one set of people, but I won't actually like apply any sort of a standard to the industry. And I won't, for example, remember, this is also where I always try to make these key points. When you pretend to do something and you don't, you also make a mockery of what you're pretending to do. So that's even worse, Semler. What you've done there is pretend I care so much, in this case about Ukrainian lives, that I'm going to sanction esports companies from Russia in the hope that by some sort of bizarre, like trickle up de-economics, it fucks Putin up and he stops the war. That's the implication, right?
Yes, that's
if you then go out there and you just take 2 people and go, you sit out, and then the rest of you go, who gives a fuck about that? You obviously don't care about the lives, do you? Wait, by the way, spoiler, I know obviously no lives will be saved by sanctioning CS teams. But the premise is you're doing an exercise, you're making a public gesture that's supposed to be in line with what you believe in. It's like, you have to understand when you do that, it's not even about the idea of me saying like you've done a bad job. Like, for your own fucking good conscience, surely you have to do this right. Surely if you're going to apply something strict like that, you've got to make sure, like, let's make sure, like, same with any law, that it is applied appropriately to everyone involved, whether they are big or whether they are small. Because in this case, it isn't about that you're big, is it? Like, it's not like, well, VP makes so much more for Putin that he can keep the war effort. Like, no, that's obviously not the case, is it? It's a fucking shitty little team. No, but, I mean, I could obviously make a fucking banger joke about James saving the AWP or some shit like that, but even that doesn't fucking make any sense, does it? It doesn't really apply in real life. It's a fucking video game, boys. So I have to say, that whole topic to me, the reason why that depresses me a little bit is because this is the power, but also the lack of power that Richard's had in his career. He can make us all aware of this, but even he can't do anything about it. Like unfortunately, this info is known. So the best we can do is people like me and you can know it and sort of keep it in the back of our mind and go, but you weren't telling the truth. But ESL's not going to do anything because of this. Companies that have sanctions aren't going to do anything because of this. I imagine, by the way, in the future, this is the thing I'm interested for. I want to know in the future if they'll do this with other global conflicts, if they'll just decide, right, well, this particular, because that's the angle no one ever talks about. You notice that? That's it. What they never talk about is this. This is basically a trial run for what they're probably going to do in the future with the current thing. What will happen is this, if I had to guess, we can do a little segue in, a little tangent, by the way, a little sidebar if you want. Basically, whoever is against the American Anglosphere Empire, which is the one that controls all the media we all view, they will just label you as the enemy and evil, and they'll say you do war crimes. They'll say all those things. They'll have that big checkbox they do. By the way, it's convenient, isn't it, Samuel, how in my lifetime, every enemy of the United Kingdom and USA, 100% war crimes. They're always just 24/7 war crimes. All this, the joke almost is like that old Bill Hicks part. It's almost like, what do you need? Like a dog? There you go, he's fucking dogs. There you go, Lord, fucking he hates dogs. Like the joke is you just keep and grabbing for stuff till you find what I'm going to be outraged by. Like the premise is like, I actually get the vibe. This isn't the end. Like I know for this, look, in Europe it probably is. We don't might not have many wars in Europe, but they're going to probably start doing this with other countries as well.
Well, like now it starts to get fuzzy, the line between governments and corporations.
Yeah, of course.
That's the really weird one.
Sure.
Where it's like all of a sudden corporations are just going to arbitrarily decide, actually, we're just going to cut off that country. completely. And, you know, the governments may be trying to negotiate some kind of peaceful thing or whatever, but like now you have this weird thing where you can actually have just corporations that are deciding foreign policy and just say like, actually, we're going to shut off all of our services over there.
Yeah,
no matter
exactly.
if that's actually going to put
Yes.
thousands of people out of business or out of work. And, you know, who knows if they live or die, you know, when we're so concerned about human lives, you know, like we're going to put people into unbearable situations because of that. That is the future. That is actually what it looks like is going to be the case. And it feels like we see that more and more with the influence of social media.
Yes.
Where all of a sudden it's like, how is it perceived by people in social media, and whether or not they approve or not is what actually decides if a case even happens or not. We're seeing that all the time as well. So it does kind of freak you out, because like there were these concepts enshrined in our governments or in our past, you know, the idea of like, you know, you're innocent until proven guilty, you know, that just goes out the window now if it's going to be kangaroo
for
courts,
sure.
and people just get to decide if you're guilty or not just based on whether they like what you say or not. You know, holy shit, you know, that's going to open up a whole can of worms where you can just get destroyed overnight because you said something wrong that somebody disagreed with, and there's nothing that there's no what jury of your peers that's going to be able to save you at that point. You're screwed. If that's the path, like it feels like that's the path we're going down. So again, it's kind of like, it's going to be really interesting because esports is so closely tied to social media, and basically just, you know, half of it pretty much just lives on social media at all times. All these communities are completely connected online. It feels like we're going to be on the cutting edge of all of this in esports, because
that's what's ruined it though, mate. Like
Sorry?
What I think's actually ruined it is exactly that. Esports, just like every other, this is how, right? Good news, everyone. We're not in the mainstream yet, and we never probably will be, but we're even closer than we were before. We're like right on the fringe of the mainstream. Like basically, esports now is where UFC was, like say 5 years ago. It's like at the edge of the consciousness. People know the most famous people. Maybe they know like the biggest fight, but they don't follow it like religiously, right? But here's the good news. The good news is we're at that point. The bad news is, like every other aspect of culture, it's now part of the stupid culture war. And so this is the reason I bring this up is this, because Richard often mentions this, and I realize most fans won't be old school enough to know what he means by it, right? Richard would always make the point that the reason why he finds like this, for example, the whole thing between Russia and Ukraine and section of the Russians, the reason he finds that so disappointing is because, first of all, you're not having a meaningful effect on their economy. So you're not like in a practical sense saving lives. But more importantly, you are sort of in a sense villainizing just anyone who happens to be Russian. And basically the premise that me and Richard in the esports we came up in, the vibe was very much more almost like a hippie vibe. You remember it was supposed to be that esports was what transcended stupid shit like your country, your culture, your sex, your fucking identity. The idea was you could go onto the internet, and I mean the most extreme example was you could just be like a paraplegic, and in theory, as long as you can play the game in some way with some thing, no one knows that. You've got game, you play the game, people play with you. It's fun. The famous examples in the past were you would have events where, I mean, the most famous example ever was you would have like a competitor from Palestine and a competitor from Israel, and they'd go to like the World Cyber Games or something, and they'd do a you know, like a photo op where they'd handshake and show that, like, you know, we are just gamers. We are not about the politics, you know, we are just kids playing games. And that used to be, by the way, at the time, aside from just like feel good, wholesome material, it used to actually make you think like, fuck, maybe there's like a future to esports as more than just games. Like maybe it can be like something that bridges people. Because the premise was, the reason why in real life those people are at odds is because they're not in any way connected, are they? They live in different countries, or they're separate, or they have different identity groups, and they're all talking in their own little circles, whereas the game brings them together, gives you the community. But I have to say, that's gone though now, dude. Like now it feels like we've gone the other way, because I have to say, before we even got into the country stuff, all the SJW stuff ruined all that. That immediately divided everyone. That immediately balkanized the entire space. That immediately took, literally, like, there would be women I was working with on issues in the scene. Suddenly that woman has to be against me, and then someone else has to be against me. And then if this guy's gay, he has to be against me. And if this guy's just not British, like, they just divided everyone. They fractured the whole thing. And it feels like that's just going to continue. This is just a sort of new version of it, I think.
Or you're going to have to be very consistent with how you get the message across, or like how you keep pushing your message, right? And I think that's like, if anything I regret about like the whole ESL drama thing is that I didn't keep pushing, because I did end up having a couple of female pros onto my Vilga and Goosebreeder, two elite female CS pros, brought them onto my show, and we had a very great, like a entertaining discussion for an hour and a half on the topics, you know, just like, hey, let's work through this. I want to hear your perspective on it because you've got so much experience in the scene. Fill me in. Am I missing anything? Right? I wasn't just like, you know, this is how I see it, and, you know, screw everything. And it was very much about having a discussion. So I think if we can continue to like push in that direction of having discussions and trying to have long form discussions, maybe we can start to try and push it back the other way. But that I think maybe this is why you, myself, Richard, some of the older hands in the scene, and including, I've had this conversation with other guys who have just straight up retired, who are just completely out of the esports scene now and doing other things, where it's just like, when 10 years ago it was a certain way, where it was very much like today you have to kind of add that classical in front of it, but like classical liberal, where, freedom of speech, just express yourself, it doesn't matter. And more importantly, meritocracy. It was very much just like, are you good at the game? If you play Counter-Strike, can you click heads? I don't care, any of the other details about you don't matter at all. Like, the only thing I care about is whether you're a good teammate who can play and who doesn't rage his tits off and who just clicks heads. You can do that. Fantastic. Let's game, right? Same with WoW. WoW, do you know your role? Do you know the boss fight? Do you know all this sort of stuff? Cool. Can we clear this raid? Can we clear this instant? Awesome. We had a great time. Great. Doesn't matter if you're a chick, a dude, whatever, like, none of that matters. And so it wasn't until we got to our first DreamHack. That was also, it was like so special back then, it was like DreamHack, you would show up and it's like, you're meeting everybody.
Well, it really was a gaming festival. Like, if people don't realize that angle back then, that's not like oversold. If you were a gamer and you've just spent your whole life in your bedroom, that is like going like, it's like Burning Man for gamers or something.
Yeah.
It's the event.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
It was awesome. And all of a sudden it's like, oh man, these guys for like 2-3 years or whatever. You've just been talking on TeamSpeak and playing in lobbies. Yes. And now all of a sudden you're having a beer with each other after the games. And it was just like totally awesome. But you didn't care like where anybody was from. There was 15 different nationalities in the room together. Who cares? We're all having a good time playing the game, right? That really brought things together, brought people together. And so maybe that's why we get a little bit frustrated or a little jaded or whatever with how things are going now, in the sense that we remember a time when none of that other stuff mattered. It was all just about the game and having fun and being good to each other for the most part.
Dude, I would even say explicitly didn't matter. Like, if people don't know another angle, like, again, I know people can try and misinterpret all these things the way they want, but I don't care. I've got space to talk, right? Basically, another thing I think that actually ruined esports, I know they're going to take this as like, oh, he wants to bring back like saying slurs or some stupid shit like that. But no, it's the premise that actually what you would do is, in just a very informal manner, you would actually make fun of these topics as a way to break the ice. Like, if people don't know, I've once told this story. It's a funny, like, Thorin anecdote. That I once went to a DreamHack when I was like working CSGO events. This is like in the 2010s. And when you get on like the plane, you get off the plane at fucking Gothenburg, you have to get driven like 2.5 hours or something in a fucking van, right?
That's right.
So DreamHack obviously would pick up, like, not just me. I have to go with like a fucking Quake player that's going, and then some Warcraft 3 guy, whatever year it was, like StarCraft 2 probably. And they had a bunch of these people. One of them was like a guy who was from Israel. He was like some Quake live player from Israel. And obviously the first thing I said, because I knew I'm going to have to sit for 2 hours with this fucking guy, so I just turned to him and go, so why do you hate Palestinian people then? Like, as a fucking like joke opener. Because obviously all he did immediately was go, no, I don't. What do you mean? I never said that. And then I was just like, I'm just fucking with you, mate. Obviously, and then we started all having a good convo, and it was like a laugh everywhere. If people don't know, this is a real quality that makes me know, by the way, that like SJW type people or people in esports who talk about privilege, etc., always come from privilege themselves. Here's how you know, Semler, because if you've ever worked a real blue collar job where you're all just doing some shit job where you like lift this thing and put it over here, or you just screw this thing here, everyone who works those jobs, it's all sorts of like races, different like fucking backgrounds, and they all do that, Semler. They all just lightheartedly banter each other. And that's the way you get through the day. Because the premise goes, especially for men, the way you deal with things being shitty is you just sort of make them fun. You make it some banter, you make it some silly crack of just saying some stupid shit to this guy or blah, blah, blah. But and so as a result, if you're Irish, you're making fun of this guy from this country and he's making fun of the fact you're Irish. You're probably going to get drunk after this or whatever, Like, that's actually, it's not what people present it as now as like some super harmful thing. That's actually like social fucking lubricant. And by the way, in esports, that doesn't exist now. I think that's even part of why everyone's so fractured, because here's the scenario. You can't even have certain conversations because they've intentionally booby-trapped them all. Where, for example, for me and you to have a conversation about women in esports, we have to first address, do we hate women? Well, why would that even be the initial premise? Our careers show we don't. Our lives and our friend groups show we don't. Like, that's just, what's genius about that is that's a great distraction. I mean, we never get to the actual convo. We never actually have an interesting discussion about this topic. We just waste our time in sort of a fucking anterior room fighting goons, like the fucking henchmen. We never get to the final boss, do we?
The entire time, and it's no longer fun. Like you had these crazy green rooms in the past where anything goes, no cameras, no recording, because we're just going off the walls, and then it turns into just a scenario where it's eggshells. Like, I had to, like, that was one of the things from Overwatch League season 1 to 2, the atmosphere changed because certain people were brought on. And then all of a sudden, it's like everybody's walking on eggshells. Nobody's saying anything. You're super careful. You're just talking about the game. Just talk about Overwatch, and no jokes, no nothing. And you know, that's it just takes away completely from the soul of the thing, which is, you know, just about having a fun and a good
There's
time,
no
not taking
camaraderie.
things
Yeah,
too
exactly.
seriously.
Yeah.
You know, the camaraderie goes. So,
because you know that's an area I saw people tried to spin this against you, actually, funnily enough, right around, because obviously there's that stupid journalist woman who said that utterly inappropriate thing where she just revealed something you said in a press room.
oh yeah,
don't worry, one day I'll do a video, Sam,
exactly,
because it's one of the
that moment.
Thing is, though, that
yeah.
if I ever do a video, it'll be one of the all-time great slams, because this woman looks so stupid if you know anything actually about esports. But the people who don't thought they could slam me because they were like, well, you were in a press room. He wasn't in front of a microphone, you dumb fuck. It wasn't a press conference of Semler. Like, that logic, for real. Like, she's implying, by the way, that if when Semler was sat next to her and she just took like a phone call and she was like talking to her dad, like, oh yeah, and I might see you on the weekend, it'd be fine for Semler to just put on Twitter like, oh, Liz has seen her dad on the weekend. Like, how would that be appropriate, you fucking idiot? That's not totally off the record. Like, you have in no way or in any good faith engaged with that person to put their words on the record. So anyway, the point isn't what you said, but the point is, like, in that scenario, right? I can't remember where I was going with that. What was I going on about there?
Oh, we're all over.
Where were we at on that point, though?
Well, that point is just about how things can get taken out of context, or people are willing to.
Oh, that was it. Because here's the problem, though. When you say that, though, about like the way you were describing, like, what was it you were saying, though, just before that about things getting taken out of context? Fuck, I'm trying to think how I was going to describe it.
No, the problem is that I get so wrapped up in your story that I forget.
Oh, right, I see.
To.
Okay.
And I'm just along for the ride at that point. Like, where are we going with this? Shit. Well, I mean, I think a lot.
I know what it was. Here's the point I want to make, right? What they will do unfairly, because, and by the way, if you're wondering, what do you mean they, and why do you keep saying like this? Because the same fucking literal playbook is run by these people in their thousands for 8 years now, you morons. You just don't pay attention. You're the guy who's like, I'm the guy who just started paying attention today. You know what? I think we need to maybe have a conversation about if schools have gotten out of control. You're so far behind the fucking pace, mate. Like, so you just quiet down a second and let us get to this core, because here's the core point to make, right? What they'll do, and I've seen this happen many times, sometimes, when you say that it ruins the camaraderie, they'll always spin it like this, like, oh, see, so now that the sexist guy doesn't feel comfortable, suddenly he has to like feel what it's like to be the man. No, it's not like that at all, because here's the thing. It never was the case that those green rooms were like people there like, oh, they weren't walking on eggshells around us, by the way. They weren't having a bad time. Everyone was having a brilliant time. That's why if you ever look, by the way, those are also some of the people who never come out against people like me and Richard, people who were in those green rooms, because they know who we actually are. They've been in the trenches with us for hours and hours, having the real conversations, having fun chats, literally getting them normal on the personal level. So actually, it's the other way around. People will try and pretend like, see, that's what happens when, you know, like the cis white male has to finally like adjust to other people. No, it's the other way around. What you want for real, and it's what they've always wanted, there's a bigger political point you could tie it to here, is they want the tiniest fraction to tyrannize the rest of the majority. And everyone else in that room has to always be thinking, what is this one person they included here who's going to make an issue out of it? What are they going to do if I make that comment? What are they going to do if I make a joke? What are they going to do if something just happens that we'll all see on the TV? That's what ruins the vibe. It's nothing to do with like we wanted like the old boys club or whatever. If people don't know, there were loads of women in these green rooms. Some of the coolest people were in these green rooms. People you would know, people, by the way, who publicly maybe don't even publicly align with us, but they're all cool people. We used to have brilliant camaraderie. So, by the way, that's also another reason why I know personally I've started to just turn down more and more events as the years went on. It was also that you'd go to the event and you were like, oh, this isn't even the event though. Like half of what I enjoyed was the camaraderie. It was seeing the same people, seeing cool. And when you go and it's all the newer people, or it's the people who have a million fucking, put it this way, where they're trying to tell their whole life story in the fucking Twitter bio. Like those people, you can't have a great time with them, mate. Guess what? They are fucking paper thin caricatures. Like there's nothing there, mate. You just poke a hole in it. There's nothing behind it. Like great. So you really are like that, I guess.
I don't know if this is just like a part of things moving and evolving and becoming more corporate as well, though, because I feel like now, like having worked with a corporation now in Blizzard, and where it just seems like this is all par for the course. Like those people they've already made it past this stage into just accepting it, right? Like they're cool with the fact that you can't have any camaraderie.
We were definitely we were sort of like a little bit lucky that we got to stay in that oasis for a while. Because you're right, essentially, like HR behavior means you can never do any of that stuff anyway. Of course, like that is essentially what they've inserted in esports. I mean, in your case, the reason for Overwatch it makes sense is because for that one you weren't just hired event by event. You were actually like you worked for the company. So at that point, they're just going to apply the same stuff they apply to the guy fucking the janitor, aren't they?
We didn't have to sit through. We did have to sit sit through a sexual harassment, like once per season, we had to sit through a sexual harassment meeting where it was a couple of shit-eating lawyers just standing there with grins, getting paid. You know, basically.
See, the sad thing there is you said meeting, because if you'd have said
people.
we had to sit through a sexual harassment course, I was going to go with it being Blizzard. You can't even know what is it for, anti. See the joke there? Like, keep going.
I think it probably is going to start rubber banding back because there's going to be too many, especially like with like ESL, for example. Like, how do you have that kind of messaging in the corporation when you know that the people paying your bills are doing other things, right? Like, how do you hold that? So I think eventually it's just going to have to. It may be the pushback the other way, and so we'll, obviously we can see whether that's going to be the case or not. Hopefully, crossed fingers, right? Crossed fingers.
As usual, all sorts of topics discussed on this show, sidebars, tangents, anecdotes, silly jokes, serious analysis though, right? Obviously the game's IEM Cologne's going on. Now, I'm not going to make any bets for you on IEM Cologne because by the time this episode comes out, the quarterfinals probably already been done. I obviously won't know the results and the odds yet for the next matches. But I will say, over on Esports Bet, they have all the CSGO you could want. Like right now, they've got like the Dust 2 DK League. They've got the Elite Series. They've got ESEA over in Maine. They've got the one in Australia for Melbourne, the qualifier. They've got the Fire League, which is an Argentinian league. They've got a whole bunch of different things. Obviously, they have a whole bunch of different features on the site as well. Like if you were to deposit some crypto, you will get a 50x bonus of DJT to play in competitions like the World's Prediction Series. So if you were to put $100 worth in, you would get 5,000 DJT. You'd have the $100 still as crypto, but you'd also have 5,000 DJT to bet on things. And they have recently released their new hybrid AI compliance system, which opens up every player to more matches around the world while also making withdrawals faster, being able to better target the cheaters who ruin the markets for everyone. Essentially, they had a tiered system before where they had to check that people weren't just part of betting groups and just putting bets onto super low matches that were rigged in one particular way and putting the money in when all the odds went the right way. This is a system now that's going to automatically make it easier to check who the legit bettors are, who they can then pay out, and who the people who are trying to scam the system are. So if you enjoy betting and you enjoy esports, how about combining the two? Esports Bet.
But all right, should we move into
let's talk about some more CS?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got a couple of things that I was looking at that I wanted to get your thoughts on, actually.
Let's do it.
Because there was the Moses tweet that really blew up, right? Where he was talking about Shocks being on Liquid for 6 months. So I'll just read it out for you guys. Maybe we can, like, I don't know. Do we do any editing? Do we bring up anything on the?
In theory, but I'd have to like remember to tell him to do it or whatever. So I don't know. I can't remember.
I'll just read out
go on.
Moses meme. It's like, make all the memes about NACS you'd like, but Shocks only lasted 6 months in an A team because of burnout due to crazy scheduling, travel complications, and an overloaded CS calendar. These are factors NASA players make a life and career out of on top of performance expectations. And so the obvious takeaway from this is just like, well, you had to be on the road a lot and all that sort of thing. But like the point that I took away from this was what actually made me think of was that Shocks, he's got a family, he's got a kid. And I think the real drop off point is that if he didn't have those things, if he's just like a young buck like Yakinder coming into the team with no ties, no nothing, just wants to play CS, grind all day and get better and win a tournament, like that person is not going to turn that down. That person is going to go all in like the Brazilians have and like others have. But as soon as you start actually having a wife, kids, responsibility at home, I don't think we've made it yet to the point in the West, at least, where the players are making enough money where they can actually pay people to help the wife take care of the kids while they're away training, while they're away on the road, or while they're training. I don't think that we're quite making enough money on the West side to be able to afford to make that problem like go away the way that the Eastern players can. So like examples, all the big drop-offs like Pasha, Pasha is kind of like on the line because Poland, right? Well, like Pasha dropped in performance as soon as he started having kids, right? It was kind of like the beginning of the end. Neo, Taz, kids, Forest, kids, Shocks, kids. Like as soon as you start adding kids in on the West, it gets rough to maintain. Whereas on the other side of things, where like money may not be the issue is like Electronic. Electronic has had a family for years, and yet he is still just, basically in the elite team putting in the work, and now the IGL of what is the #1 team in the world. So I mean, like maybe what is the point that I'm trying to make? I guess
seems like a rare person can have kids and stay top pro,
but also geography has a geography and economy has something to play with it, because Electronic, with the money that he makes, no worries. He's like a king where he lives. So he can just go ahead and pay anybody to take care of it, bring on the help, make sure that his wife isn't getting frazzled. And so when he's training, he's good. He comes home, he spends time with the family, but it's all good. It's not like the end of the days where it's like his wife needs help to take care of the kids. He can make all that happen financially. It's not a problem for him in the East. In the West, I don't think we've reached that point yet. And so that's why you see players struggle. The Shocks not being able to perform on liquid because of burnout, or maybe Forrest not hitting as not being as aggressive as he possibly could to get onto a better team than the ones that he's been on recently, right? And now he's pretty much benched, and who knows what's going to happen with him. Some of the Polish players, not necessarily making the plays either. So, like, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Like, why do you think, or do you think that that's a factor? Does that make sense to you? Or do you think it was something else with like Shocks burning out and just not being able to hack it anymore?
I think essentially there's like a bunch of different discussions all going on here, but at once, and as usual, people don't separate them out, so it just becomes a mess. Like, for example, if you want to look at esports as a wider phenomenon than just CS:GO, I think you immediately, by contrasting, start to see whether CS:GO players are having an issue, which is, are people not aware that if you play like a major esport like League of Legends, probably the biggest esport in the world, or even Overwatch when the Overwatch League was a big thing, if you play these esports similar, you move away from your house, no matter, even if you're in America. Like, even if you're an American, if you play in the Overwatch League, you are moving to LA, you are living in, but essentially it's the great equalizer. Like, sure, it's going to suck a lot more if you're Chinese and you have to go to LA than if you're from like the Midwest and you go to LA. Well, in theory, in terms of like culture and all that stuff, knowing how to deal with stuff. But the main issue for me is, it's just accepted that's part of the esports journey. It's like, it's the same. Put it this way: the premise in those games is it's like if you were some guy who was like a theater actor in Dallas, and you go like, well, I want to be in movies, but I don't want to go to Hollywood. It's like, well, then you're shit out of luck, aren't you? Like, that's just what you have to do. Yeah. So in esports, in other games, it's just a fault you label. In CSGO, this is the problem, basically, is that it's actually one of the few games, I think Dota's a bit like this as well because of the circuit. It's one of the few games where you can have the best of both worlds if you're a pro. You can go to the tournaments and earn the money and be in the best team in the world, but then you go home to your home city with your home friends, your family, sometimes you literally as in your personal family, your wife, your children. You can go back and you can have the home life and you can have the esports side. Now, here's the problem. Because esports and CSGO and Dota and these games are a bit unique in that sense, it means that anyone who doesn't get that, though, it's going to be massively unfair to that person. So, for example, how is it fair that you're a Liege and you play in Team Liquid, but you live wherever Liege lives and you have your family and your mom and your grandma and you talk to your friends, and then once you're done with all that, you go online and you play games in Team Liquid. But if you're simple, you're living in a team house in LA with the League of Legends players, like, you don't have your family there, you don't have things around you don't have food around it. Like, which one's going to be more stressful? It's obvious, isn't it? Like, the simple one's way harder. And that's why in the history of CSGO, I've told this story many times. I have so many times tried to broker like good EU players moving to NA teams like Cloud9, like Team Liquid. And one of the reasons it never happens is this reason, is people don't want the massive downside. Like, yeah, you get a slightly better team, because often this is when you don't do it if you get the offer from FaZe Clan. This is usually when you're slightly on the outs in Europe, and the way you could sort of revitalize your career is go to a Team Liquid or something. Like, the problem is, like, it is just going to be a worse set of life scenarios. Now, the issue has become, this is where we connect into a different conversation here, you'll notice. I totally feel, as you can see by the setup there, I totally feel for the guy who has to move to the other country because everyone else isn't doing it. It sucks for you. Like, it's the same reason, by the way, why I actually thought it was wild that Device left and went to the NIP one again. He's like, having to move to this place. Like, mate, everyone else is getting the benefit of living in their spot, getting all the upside. I even, by the way, think that's why CSGO players burn out less. I know people are going to think CSGO players burn out when you send them to too many events. They said they burn out if you send them to 3 continents in 2 months. They don't burn out because of the games. You don't know, people don't know this. In League of Legends, if you don't make worlds, you play fuck all games in a year. You know, in an entire year, you might play like 50 single games of League of Legends, like, for your career. And that's like a few months of intense period. But I'll tell you what, Semler, they burn you out because you're just in a team house for 10 straight weeks. You're practicing every day. You're not with your family. You're in that's what burns you out. So here's the first thing to say is this. I do totally appreciate it is way harder for anyone who moves continents like this, like Moses' sentiment's meant to be. And obviously he's doing it from the NA side because he's known people who've, especially because he was the coach in Team Liquid, he's known how hard it is for the NA teams. But that connects to another detail, and you might know from my Twitter why I have a little bit less sympathy for this side of it, which is when we go to the industry, we have to ask the question, Semler, But why is everyone going to Europe? Wait a minute, isn't Valve Software an American company? Wasn't the whole game made in America? By the way, when I started in esports and CS just began, the events in Europe used to have like a tenth of the prize money of the ones in Dallas, Texas, in America. It was the other way around. Like famously, if you were the third best Swedish team, Semler, you were shit out of luck because there was no qualifier spots and no sponsor money. So you would have to sit home and watch some NA team come 8th at a CPL when you could have beaten them all day long. But you couldn't get there because you didn't have the sponsorship to go to America. So we've actually flipped the dynamic. That's just in terms of tournaments. But the point I'm making is a very valid one. Why is everything not in America? Esports in general, America is basically the stage. Like it's LCS and Riot and fucking let's have TI in America. We'll get like all this shit, right? So the real problem is this. Always we would have had some of these issues. Like obviously ESL and Blast have most of the circuit. But if things were different, you remember it was like a few years back, America was the main place they were trying to make stadium events work. Everyone wanted to have the event in New York and Chicago and fucking San Jose. And you'd have all these events. So you're trying to make it. The problem really is this. For some reason, the live American esports experience hasn't worked out very well. You even saw this with the IEM Dallas tournament. Dude, that's a Grand Slam event, and the actual teams they ended up with at the end. You would think that was like an old DreamHack Open or something. Teams just dropping out 2 days before and then just announcing like, oh yeah, we are going with like this top team, but we're just going to let our best players stay at home. We're bringing a fucking stand. Like, you just ruin the event when you do that. So here's the problem I have is in reality, Counter-Strike is Europe now. That's all it is. Yeah, everyone has to go to Europe to play Counter-Strike. So my issue is this. If we can only talk about today, Semler, I have a lot of sympathy for these players. But here's the issue. Me and you were involved in a project which literally attempted to directly solve this problem. We tried to make a league that would be an NA-focused league. It's where most of the teams were in Flashpoint. At least one event a year. There was actually a plan to have one in Europe, one in America. There was going to be a stadium event, and each season, like it did for the first two, would have $1 million prize pool. And the premise was, this is the part everyone gets lost on, Semler. They think what we said was, you have to quit everything and only be in Flashpoint. No, you only had to skip one season of ESL Pro League. And by the way, that's if ESL just kept scheduling their Pro League at the same time as Flashpoint. We even said that as long as it's not at the same time as Flashpoint, we never denied anyone competing in another tournament. As long as you're available physically to compete in the tournament, you can go compete in any tournament you want. It was actually the other way around. So the people didn't want you in Flashpoint. Now, I know that Flashpoint didn't have the teams. I know it didn't end up being a great project. But did you think from day one it was going to solve the whole problem? Well, like every team was just going to sign up and then we think, no, but it was definitely a stepping stone. And here's the issue. Because all those NA orgs blew millions, I mean, first of all, loads of them left the space. That's why Flashpoint's dead. They all bloody they don't have CSGO teams anymore. In general, North American esports, it isn't a thing in CSGO. It's diminishing. And I don't know what the way back is. Because as I say, even though it was a long shot, it was a Hail Mary Flashpoint. It was, if you remember why we did it, the whole reason we did it, remember what we said when it began? CS is dying. The numbers don't add up. It's not going to work. I mean, we didn't know at the time the NA region would die, but if the second best major region of the space has died out and gone, like it's gone. If anything, you need Flashpoint more than any now. Somewhere it's never going to be again. It's never going to be another one.
Financial space in this. That was the main thing. That the number one financial scene in the space, because the thing that people don't consider is like, oh, well, why don't they just make more money in Europe? It's like, well, now you're dealing with national budgets. Yes. You're dealing with like the Belgian budget or the Swiss budget or whatever, right? You know, and so if you're going over to North America, you're dealing with the North American content budget. It's the US budget. It's so much more money on the line in terms of sponsorship and everything else that you can do in North America than you can in Europe. And so the fact that we've let it slip through our fingers, that we just have not been able to establish any kind of foothold over in America when it comes to Counter-Strike, it just blows my mind.
What is your take on like on the plight of, like, essentially what the gist of the sentiment is what the plight of NA players who have to go for 10 weeks at a time to Europe and be away from their family? What do you think of that?
I think it's well, okay, yeah, I was thinking about this actually the other day, because I mean, at the same time, it's not like they're working for peanuts. You know, the guys who are making the guys who are on these teams now, the Liquids, etc., even the EGs, if you want to push it that far, you know, like they're making very, very good money.
You make like 30K a month. Yeah. We're talking big money,
very good money. Like, or at least the stars on those teams. I don't know about some of the new signs, you know, like OC or whatever. Like, I don't know the like details for him, but like, you know,
I would guess even he's on like 15K or something. Yeah. So he'll be on a very nice salary. Don't worry.
They're making very good money.
Yes.
So the way that you could approach that really is, you know, it's like your career is probably going to be short, because on average, not everybody can be Rain. You know, not everybody's just going to keep competing at tier 1 for year on year on year, because they're just an amazing human being and teammate. Shout out to Rain, big fan. You know, it's like, it comes down to like, what are you willing to put up with for the money? Like, and it's the same thing actually for esports commentators, funnily enough. You know, if like you get into the elite tier 1 of esports, you're spending, for a period there, Anders and I were spending like 250 days on the road, but we were making very good money at the time. So it was just like the trade-off is like, well, I accept this burn rate because I'm getting paid for my time very well. And so if I can do this for a year, 2 years, you know, and make this kind of money, cool. That's me being able to have this kind of money going forward. And then maybe I, you know, there's some way that works out that I get to spend more time at home in the future, but it will have been worth it. It's a worthy trade-off. And so when it talks about like when the North American players and even some of the South American players, although I don't hear it as much from the South American players about being on the road, it's really the North American players that I hear it from. But like when those guys are saying like, oh, it really sucks to be on the road, I'm like, yes, but you are also making a metric shitload of money to be on the road. And so you accept this burn rate, you live on the road, it's rough, you compete, you really try, but you could call it quits next year.
They are making it sound a little bit like they work flipping burgers at McDonald's.
Exactly.
It's 5-hour drive to get there. Yeah, exactly.
You know, like you're making extremely good money doing this.
Yes.
And the thing is that it is, I also don't really have much mercy in the sense that now there's Valorant. And we've seen players that made that decision. Ethan felt like it was okay. Like he saw the trade-off ahead. He saw what was going to happen, where you knew, especially when Valorant started to pick up, you knew that going forward, you would have to be in Europe if you're going to compete in tier 1 CS. That was it. Like you were going to go live in Serbia. Serbia became the capital of esports during COVID. Everybody was in Serbia. That was the place to be. That land made money hand over fist, and, you know, awesome. Cause like Serbia, cool. Yanko, I'm sure, was just, you know, showing a great time on the town every night. Right. But like, you knew that was it. And so certain players were just like, yeah, I'm not willing to do that. And so they go over to Valorant or they go elsewhere. And it's the long and short of it is like, at the end of the day, it's your decision if you're going to go ahead and make this your livelihood, your source of income. And there are options out there, especially for elite players like Elige. Elige could go to Valorant tomorrow if he wanted to and just post up in North America and never leave again. I mean, he just compete in Valorant and whatever they've got going over there, he could do that if he wanted. And so ultimately, like, people are making the decisions. It's a tough one, but you're also getting well rewarded for your time on the road. It's not like you're some soldier making $6 an hour or something like that. Like, you are getting paid. So I don't really hold it out. That was also why I was a little bit leery about the Shox move initially, you know, going into
of course.
Like, listen, he's got a family at home.
No, he had the check mark that didn't make any sense. He's actually old in his career. He's not a young guy. There's a million factors. Because as you said, essentially you want to also offset it with like some positives. Like, I'll give you an obvious example. If you're not the guy, for example, with a girlfriend, great. Now you actually might be able to go and meet a bunch of girls in this whatever city you live in America. Similarly, if you're a young guy, it's an adventure. Maybe you've never been to America. Like, Shox has been to America a billion times, guys. This is one of the most veteran players in the history of Counter-Strike. So the other thing as well I would say is this. This is where, if you notice, I was very careful to say there's a bunch of different convos and factors all going on that aren't all directly, like, totally connected. So the other one that this got spun into straight away is, and this is where you have to be careful, because one of the things I tried to do, Semler, I think it's what make this show actually would set Richard very unique, is we try to actually figure out not what we think about our reaction to this event, like a real life one-off event. We try to figure out what is our principle and how does that principle apply to each case of this event so that it can be consistent. So the consistent principle is this: I don't denigrate you if you complain that you have to go to Europe. Now, listen, I certainly will if you were literally a player or a team who could have joined Flashpoint and you were like, haha, I'm going to go with Pro League. Well, then fucking enjoy being in Europe all the time, because you actually chose that, man. I didn't make you chose that.
Okay, actually, I'm glad that you're here because I want to ask you this question.
Come on.
How much, because we know that Liquid are tied to the hip with ESL. How much, when it comes to Liquid, do you think the players had a say in it?
Here's the problem, Semler. This is where behind the scenes and public interact in a way that's very interesting, because I'm going to have to speculate. Because here's the issue. I know that privately, I kept getting told by the players, like, it will be our decision in the end. And it was only a couple of orgs that they were like, you know, the org makes the choice. So the players kept implying to me, especially a lot of the NA ones, that like, oh, but you know, like, we're still thinking about it. And like, but the problem is, if you look at the way specifically Nihom, Astralis, and the ones who were sort of the leaders of the group of teams that went to the Louvre agreement, that seems to me more like they just told their players what they were doing and then they held the whole negotiations. Like, my vibe from teams like Astralis, EG, Fnatic was, I don't think the players actually had any say. Or
Yeah,
maybe
I
they were
agree.
coerced as to what their decision would be, But the problem is in the modern day, this is where CS is different to other games. In the modern day, you're almost a fool if you're an org and you don't try to imply your players wanted to do it that way. Because if the fan thinks you made a choice that they didn't want, the whole PEA thing years ago, it's going to go badly.
Well,
So
this is the point that we make
Yeah.
that I make all the time is that this is why ESL, because people don't remember, but ESL were hated a few years ago. Like they were the shittest tournament organizers.
they used to get wrecked by all the pros.
They got
yeah.
wrecked by everybody.
My
at
joke
all
always
times.
used to be if you just had the wrong brand of water for someone like Fallen, they'd be straight on Twitter immediately. There'd be a tweet
Yeah.
like instant, and they'd also be tweeting, by the way, not like you're the wrong brand of water. They'd be tweeting like they were acting as though they were in like a cell in North Korea or something. Like the conditions here are unacceptable. Meanwhile, you're in some like 4-star hotel in like
Yeah.
Cologne. So like the fuck, like there was some mad out of pocket ones back in the day.
This was the play that was truly brilliant on the side of ESL is that they figured out
Yes.
you don't need to worry about anybody
Yes.
else. All you do is please the players, and if
Yep.
the players are happy, then
works.
they go on social media and they make sure that everybody else is happy because the fans are going to listen to the players and no one else. It doesn't matter what anybody else
Yes.
says. If the players say it's going to be that way, then the fans are going to see it that way, and then you're going to win. And that's how ESL actually went from being the most hated TO to being clearly the most beloved now because they just can't seem to do any wrong.
It's why I always mention, if you don't notice, I always say the reason I actually think that system where they had teams rank themselves for the seeding, the reason that's genius is one, the teams usually do a half decent job because they put a rule into something cheating. And then two, it means no one complains about seeds because if the teams themselves did it, then how can they complain? So it fixes the problem. Anyway, the point I was going to make was this. Aside from people who specifically did choose this exact bed and now don't want to lie in it because it looks all shitty after they've shit it, right? Aside from those people, if you're just a normal NA pro and it don't, like, say you're someone who's like OC, you just joined Team Liquid. Now it's your chance to be at the top level. Fuck, I have to go to Europe constantly, leave my family. Look, I do feel for you, but this is where another conversation gets tied in. But crucially, it's not that I'm going, suck it up, you little bitch. If you want to make money, this is CS. No, what you should have been doing though, and I did do on these shows, and people can confirm this, is the whole time people like JKS, Azza, Fallen, Fur, all those people from South America and Australia who moved permanently to NA and just lived the whole year round there, massive props to those people before they've even made a frag in the server. Now, you can complain about their level as a player, but that one thing they did, if we're going to acknowledge that it's hard for North Americans, we have to give people like the fucking JKSs of the world insane credit. Remember, they used to fly like 30 hours. They had to go back to renew their fucking visas. They would sometimes have to go back for like a minor, then come back for pro. It was ridiculous what they were doing. And by the way, the reason I say I always did give them that, I always would mention it on these shows. No one else in the scene did. People just acted like if they got there. By the way, sometimes they would be coming off those long haul flights. 2 days later, play a match, lose. And we'd all just judge them like they're just shit, aren't they? You can't compete with NRG. Like NRG might have just been sat like around the fucking corner having a coke or something. Like this is ridiculous. So that's the one problem I have is because if you notice, that's what happened with this discussion. You saw the South American players, the ones from Australia, they all came out and they were sort of like, guys, like NA players, like, are you really that unaware that we were doing this the whole time in your region? So I think that's a valid point as well that was brought up, because by the way, mad props to those players. Like if you're people like JKS, remember, it took JKS, mate, something like 4 years to make like a deep run at a major. Like these guys really fucking hustled. That is hustling. We don't just living permanently in another country, coming 13th over and over for years to grind your way up. Mad props to people like that.
Yeah.
But they are the outliers, though. I think it's very rare people can handle that, mate.
Well, that's the thing, and it's going to appeal to a certain type of person. And like when your options are limited, you can see, but it's worth it. Like you want to do something bad enough, or you can think of doing nothing else. Then I think ultimately the people that appeals to are going to make that decision and move, and it's not going to be that big of a deal. So that's why I was kind of surprised by the Moses tweet as well, though, because I'm just like, well, that's kind of like you're not signing that blindly. You know that those are the terms, right? You're going to be on the road, and you're going to have to take that in the teeth, and that's just the way of it. The reality of CS now is that it's in Europe, and so the
problem is the moment was too juicy for Moses, because you have to realize he's obviously seen all the NA players take that shit. So when Shox, who's obviously like an icon of European Counter-Strike, when he saw like, oh, it's burning me out a bit, he's like, see, even your beloved Europeans.
The bald eagle just passed you. You know,
you had to come out. I know. You had to come out. Because I will say, like I say, I certainly do feel for all the players who have to travel like that. It does. So I will say though, this is why, and I remember the last player to ask this was Bobsky a few years ago. This is why when CS:GO pros, it's always the young ones stupidly pipe up and go, when I look at League of Legends, I wish there was an LCS for CS:GO. You don't know what you're asking for, brother. You do not know what you are asking for. But this way, when I talk to my mates in League of Legends, they wish they could fucking live at home. Like, you think when I'll give you an example, because you know the same thing, like I said, the same thing happens in League of Legends. It's just because everyone moves, it's taken for granted. Like, because there's so much more money salary-wise in the LCS and League of Legends than the LEC, the European League. If you're from like Denmark and you're some player, you might just move to an NA team and just live in NA for half a decade, and you'll only be going home to your family in the off season, like at the end of the year or something. But one, you get paid way more in League of Legends. You're going to get millions of dollars. So again, like you say, if you just view it as this is like a couple of years, it's worth it. Essentially, what you have to do is this. They are talking, like we said earlier, like they're just working, flipping burgers at McDonald's. This is more like working on an oil rig. You have the 3 weeks on where you cannot see civilization and they pay you incredibly well. Then you have the 3 weeks off because you have to fucking decompress. Otherwise you lose your head, wouldn't you? It's like that job. If you do that, by the way, you're not going to do that job for 50 years. You're going to get in, get the money, do it a few years, get out and do something else with your life. So I would say the same thing also about esports. Stop pretending like these are 30-year sports careers. Like, as you say, dude, to even be in tier 1 for 5 years is hard. Like, there's a lot of shit players that actually, they did a very good job hanging around, mate, and having careers and getting into other teams. So understand it's probably a few years, and I agree it sucks, but it's the reality of the fucking industry that CS:GO has chosen. Keyword chosen. Partly not chosen. The only area it wasn't chosen is, as I say, unfortunately, for some reason, it's a bigger issue than CS:GO, but it does seem like having live events in the US, something's gone amiss with that over the years in esports. It feels like to me something's gone off with that. I'm not sure why.
There's like there's an element to consider here as well, is that for whatever reason, it seems like streams are bigger in Europe or in North America. Like
that's true. Yeah.
Shroud.
I mean,
like
people would say the hours maybe help more because Europe can watch as well.
Whatever it is, or like the community, the way that the community works over there. Because like I look at, now obviously I'm just glancing through the channels and I'm like, oh, the Valorant thing's going on. I'll check who's over there, and it's like Tarek, Hiko, Shroud, like all these guys are restreaming it. And I was like, the North American players have a temptation that I don't think that's available in the same way to the European players, where there is that trade-off. There's a very real trade-off for some of those players where it's like they could live at home and just stream and make a lot of money, but they also want to have that competition and have that paycheck and whatever. Like, there's another element there to consider that's like, I don't think it's available in the same way to the European players. I don't think it works.
I also think it's cultural, dude, because here's the other thing. You'll have to tell me if you get the sense or not from your friends who are CS:GO pros in Europe. But the difference is, I do get this vibe of what you're saying. American players do sometimes think, like, they'll even sometimes do it like a math equation, like, nah, maybe I could make more streaming. To me, that's weird, because to me, I'm more like the European. The European guy just wants to be a pro in Counter-Strike. After that, he figures out what can I make the money from. He doesn't really think like, well, what would make me more money? Because I mean, I would imply the dream in Europe is be a CS:GO pro. But as you say, some people think it's just fine to be a streamer as well. To me, that's sort of, it's like you get more money, but for what? Maybe it's not as fun. Maybe it's not the gig you want.
And then you fall into the trap of becoming addicted to the streaming, and then it's a whole different sort of issue there. But that's like a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, sure.
Getting into it. It will be interesting to see like if there's going to be like serious burnout or not on some of these North American teams. Like that'll be the one. But I do love to see like careers of players in Europe that just continue to just not drop off and continue to deliver, like Rain, where it's like those guys just never stop. And there's nothing going on in Norway. So like Rain is like living in Norway, but otherwise he's got to move around Europe. He's not there's nothing like, there's no home matches for him up there. So I was just thinking about that the other day. What else can we get into here? Because I mean, there's a bunch of stuff around Cologne, obviously.
Yeah, go on
about it.
We can do a couple topics.
Like we can just get into it. I mean, excuse me. I mean, the big one that we can just touch on this actually real quick, because they went pretty deep into the tournament, which is fun. But I want to get your take on Movie Star Riders, because the take that I was playing with a little bit was just that, they're just Copenhagen Flames 2.0. But they're actually now, like, the question is going to be whether or not they can outperform Copenhagen Flames here in the playoffs. Because if they beat Team Liquid, then they are better than Copenhagen.
Oh, for sure.
Made it deeper than Copenhagen Flames.
Yes.
In terms of like an upset run as an underdog in a tournament. So like, what do you think about this Movie Star Riders team right now? Because there's a lot of hype around them, and I just keep waiting for it to fizzle. I just keep waiting to see, like, eventually you're going to have a team that you run into that's too much. And I think the playoffs in Cologne on the main stage in front of 15,000 fans, I think that's the point. I think this is the get off point for the train. there's too many experienced players on Liquid. They're not going to be able to hang with them. The fans are going to, the crowd is going to be too much of a factor, I think, for the unexperienced Movistar Riders players versus experienced, long in the tooth veterans like Elige and Nitro and that. So like, what do you think about that?
Here's the tough thing is I don't really have like a super set take as in like it's one or the other. I think it's a bit of both. Like, for example, on the one hand, you can't look at this run they've made at this particular tournament and be like, it wasn't legit at all. Like, they literally beat Vitality in 2 best of 3s, beat G2 in a best of 3, and then they even won a map of fucking Na'Vi. And by the way, I watched that series. I did a watch party. They might have won that series in 2 maps. They were actually in those first 2 maps against Na'Vi. They were fragging with them. So, like, that in itself, that is not like here's the difference. When we talk about the Copenhagen Flames example, Copenhagen Flames, actually, I would say they're fairly notorious for sort of getting like the good draw in a Swiss system. Like, you get the other bad team that went 1-0, so you get sort of a free win there, and then maybe you play someone like I remember one of them, Copenhagen Flames played NIP, but when they just made a roster move or something, so they were maybe like a slightly different lineup, so they sort of got every break went their way. That hasn't really happened here. Like, the only break you've had if you're Movistar Riders is that yes, G2 and Vitality are very fragile, big name teams who do lose, but even so, this is why it's legit as well, Samler. People are going to actually exaggerate how bad G2 and Vitality are. All I'll say is this: go and look at their tournaments this year, and all I want you to do is look at best of 3s, because here's the thing: they could lose like a BO1 in a major in a Swiss system, of course, right? Teams like even Vitality, as disappointing as they've been, you go look at the last few months, they don't just lose to nobodies in BO3 on land, mate. Like, they might lose to the other top teams, of course, because we've got like a very competitive top 10. They don't just lose to like random outsiders and just get 2-0'd. And that. So actually, that in itself tells me Movistar did something. Sure, like I say, of all the big scalps to get, you've probably gotten 2 of the ones that, I mean, both teams are probably going to make roster moves. It's implied. Yeah, they're both sort of at the end of their tether. Hasn't really worked out. But the problem is this: there's 2 other angles. One is in-game stuff. If you look in-game, the reason actually, unfortunately, I don't buy that like Movistar can become like a permanent like dark horse and like tear up the scene is because, unfortunately, this will sound weird, but when I was just looking at the box scores when this team played in last year and in online tournaments, when the AWPer Sun Pius, the player who replaced Smouya, would carry and have the big stats, you hope that means he's some sort of like fucking phenom, like, right, it's just some prodigy from Spain, and he's just a lucky Spanish, but he's going to play in this team, he's going to hard carry him. If you actually watch like the eye test, he's not that crazy in AWPer. Like, he's a good AWPer who just hits all like the sort of bread and butter shots. So it's not like he's like the one guy who can like 1v like that. Like, for example, in the game against Na'Vi, he wasn't like carrying against Simple and like, oh my God, this is amazing. He was just like a normal player well. The player who actually looked like he was maybe peaking and maybe overperforming was the entry player Mopos. This guy looked like an impact player, mate. Like, this guy was like one of those, like, basically I've been comparing him to like Art and Hampers, because on both sides, he's not on CT as well. He does those like, he always has a push on CT side. He's always aggressively taking the fight right at the edge of the corner or pushing ahead of utility. So like that player, you can imagine if that sort of the player ever takes over like a Hampers, like they can win you the game on their own, mate. Like that can be the X factor, because they're absolutely they're proactively creating circumstances in the game where you can upset someone. So that guy, I think, has done a lot of the heavy lifting. The problem is this, and this is actually the sad thing about both the quarterfinals of Cologne. You've had these enormous underdog runs, right? But even underdogs aren't all the same as other underdogs, Semler. So here's the problem. Before the tournament began, Team Liquid and Astralis making quarters, they would be underdogs, actually. They weren't expected to. Yeah. Because of the fact that you just said that this is the stage, the fucking stage of the Lanxess in Cologne. I told Monty on my other show, this isn't even an exaggeration. There will literally be players in these teams, the underdog teams, that dreamed of playing on this exact stage. This is where Simple did the 1v2. This is where fucking Taz came out and told everyone cheer for it. This is where you want to be, along with the majors, if you're a CSGO pro. So the problem is this. If you're the guys from Team Liquid and Astralis, you've just been given the greatest fucking get out of jail free card ever. Because these matchups could actually have been 50-50s if these were off stage. But I personally think you put them on stage, like, look, maybe one of the underdogs can do it, but if I have to bet on 2 matches, I'm taking the favourites to win these. Even as bad as Astralis has been, mate, I mean, first of all, Xyp9x has actually peaked at this tournament, but someone like him, I'm going to trust him way more on stage than a bunch of semi-unknown players like JDC from Germany. Like he's barely played any lands, never mind a stadium event, guys. So personally, I do think, yes, if your Team Liquid and Astralis, the stage factor almost wins you the game here. I think it's going to be really tough. Like, I think it's almost unreasonable to expect these underdogs. Because remember, like I say, some of them don't have much LAN experience. I mean, never mind stadiums, never mind being in front of a giant crowd with OJ doing like, let's go to church. Like, that's going to make you fucking shit your pants if you're a little player.
Dude, it's not only that, but like, I'm really glad that you bring up Mopos, because right now he's the top rated
that's cool.
player.
Okay.
Top rated in the tournament so far, which is really interesting. But also, when you think about it, you're going to have like the stage is going to be the thing, but now you've been gifted 4 days to just review demo and figure this guy out. Because like there are trends when it comes to opening players, unless this guy's just like aggressive everywhere or whatever. Yep. If you give veterans like a leash, you can daps like time to review tape on you, they're going to start figuring out a few of the things that you've been doing, especially if you're a new guy who nerves could potentially affect. So you're in a pressure situation where all of a sudden, you got the fans. This is the dream scenario.
There's also the crowd, remember? They might shout something when you're doing a sneaky little move on someone. You might be doing some baller move and like, ooh, behind the wall. Yeah, exactly.
So there's all of that sort of stuff that's going to play into it, and you have the prep time. That's like the big thing where it's like now you actually have 4 days where the veteran teams like Astralis and Liquid can review tape on you and prepare and just get ready and figure out, okay, we're going to figure out the map.
Yes.
What do they do on this map? What does this guy in particular do on this map? Great. Let's shut him down. And that's going to be the game plan. And so it's going to be a real question of, because obviously Mopos is aware of this. So it's going to be a question of like, how much can Mopos like dig into his toolbox and show that he's capable of changing up his game versus how much can Liquid fine tune and like adapt and actually like close some of the gaps on their side. Like if we're talking about Liquid a little bit, it's just like, they brought it up in several interviews as well in the matches where it's like, obviously there's some moments where the teamwork isn't quite there. They're not quite covering all the angles. They got flanked, against Furia, safe that crazy flank that he pulls off. It's like nobody's checking the back door and then you get wrecked, right? Like an experienced team, you always know somebody's watching.
Yes, exactly.
And that's where you can see like a team kind of coming together.
Yeah, the protocols broke down. Yeah,
exactly. So it's going to be a question of like whether or not Liquid are going to be able to bounce and actually
and by the way,
their own issues as
when
well.
I alluded to that side issue, it's not like a major factor, but it is true. If you're someone who's trying to do like a sneaky flank, when you're on stage, obviously the crowd, and especially if the other team you're doing it against are the favorites like Astralis and fucking Team Liquid, the crowd's going to shout. And here's what you don't realize as well. The top pros, that's even part of the meta of playing on stage. Mm-hmm. Like famously, people like Nico, the classics, they purposely do that. They'll mouse over a door and they know if they hear us out, might be someone behind that door. By the way, that's not considered cheating. That's just part of the setup of the stage. That's being a veteran. In the same way in like basketball, for example, you say like a veteran move is like, you do something when the ref can't see the angle or like you steal the ball or something like that's the esports equivalent of a veteran move. A bit like the old classic was when you had the stage setups where you're parallel, you look at the guy's physical face when you flashbang the site. And if you see him get flashed, you don't need to question.
That's the throwback,
You can see he did it. And then, by the way, these are all things, again, the problem you have if you're the underdogs, like the guys from Movistar, is you don't even know this meta of the game exists. You think you're just going on stage to try and replicate your play. So that's your problem, is you're actually behind on all that shit. Meanwhile, especially, this is the other tough thing in my opinion, is because we had these couple of years of online play, we've had all these people get really good at CS, but they didn't get gradually brought through the lands. They didn't start. Like, here's the problem. This Movistar team didn't get to this point because they've just come off like a brilliant set of results at DreamHack Opens, and then they've done something at a Blast Showdown, and then finally they're here. It's more like they've just been thrust into this moment now, and they haven't had a chance to level up. And even worse, the guy you're playing, it's like a guy who's played for 7 years on stage. Like that mismatch is going to be too big. It's why I stress it now, because people might wonder, in the old days before we went online, I would go more on in-game factors, like in the games that look like you'll beat them. But that's because, like I say, you couldn't get to the quarterfinals of a Cologne before we went online if you didn't have loads of LAN experience. Like, you wouldn't even be in that space in the scene. Whereas now we have got, because you saw this at the last two majors as well. Dude, how much of those last two majors were the brackets just decided by who had the experience and who didn't? Like, you saw the teams like the Gambits, the Heroics, the Copenhagen, they just faded away when you got to the playoffs. When you put them in front of that stage and they'd never been in front of a stadium crowd, they were like half as good most of the time. And unfortunately, like, I don't want it to be true, but it probably is going to happen with these teams.
Yeah, that's the thing where but that's also part of the game. And obviously we
It'll make it more epic if it doesn't, though, by the way. I'll say if one of them does it, fair play, it'll be amazing.
That's why the underdog matches, everybody gets super hype about underdog matches, because at the same time, if they manage to pull it off, then all of these factors that we've outlined are real factors. They're not just like bullshit that we say to fill time or like all mislead you or try and make you think like, oh, this is going to be way closer than it's supposed to be, or this is going to be way more one-sided. It's like, no. Because we also have that kind of experience of years on land, watching the players, watching the game, seeing how the crowd influences the players. I have to adjust how I cast when I cast in an audience. You have to change how you cast. All of a sudden, you can't say the same things that you would normally say, because I have literally seen myself say something, the crowd reacts, the player turns, and I've seen that happen a couple of times, because then obviously I stop. I'm like, okay, I found the limit of where I can go with my commentary. Now I got to take that into account. I got to say, I can't say these words anymore. I can't say this sort of thing anymore. And I have to change how I cast, because there is such a thing as land casting as well. So there's all these factors that get taken into account. And I think that, I think we've done a good job outlining just like what movie star writers have in store for them in this quarterfinal match, because it's going to be a totally different game. And I don't think these guys really, quite grasp it yet. So it's going to be so exciting. It's going to be so exciting.
And by the way, I think, like I said, I put Mouse in the same category. It's a similar scenario. They're super underdogs, not much experience. They've been playing great so far, but the problem is the team they're playing are veterans. Like, at the end of the day, say what you like. Here's the angle I think people have missed on Astralis, dude. Is because Astralis is technically only 2 Astralis members, and it's Glaive and Zipnix. Yeah, but like Config's been in a million fucking stadium events. He's won stadium events. Sure, Blamef doesn't have as much. Even he has LAN experience though. And then Farlig, he's more the outside. Spoiler, Farlig has more experience than most of the players on fucking Mouse guys. Like, Astralis does have the big advantage in that sense. Both those teams do. Team Liquid and Astralis.
And some of those Astralis guys are actually coming online in a pretty big way. I mean, Blamef, it's just amazing to see how he's just kind of like, you kind of wrote him off before as like the baiter, the happy 2.0, all that sort of thing. But like, he's actually coming into it. He's actually really coming into his own on this team. I've heard that now he's calling on Mirage as well. So he's starting to bring some of his experience into the roster to maybe help out.
No, people don't realize this, dude. I've actually come around to a very different perspective on Blamef, because I was like you, because unfortunately I've seen it happen too many times with people like Happy, where it's like, it's not like you're cheating. Like, you are still getting the kills that you need to win the round, but you can just always make yourself look better if you're the IGL who calls around himself. It's the same as if in basketball, you're a point guard, but you're a score first point guard. You can make yourself look as good as you want in that game, of course. You have the choice what you do. But the issue I have is this. When he came to Astralis, obviously he stopped being the IGL. And quite frankly, Astralis had some really bad lineups. And I don't even know that this lineup's that great. It's okay. In all the lineups they've had that he's been in, and when he wasn't the IGL, he frags out no matter what. That is very impressive, Semler. Like, I don't care that, yes, in theory, his role's a little bit easier to get. That doesn't matter. You don't do that. I don't think people get this. Like, you saw people like Coldzera, when you take away all the mechanism around them, they're not as good players. Like, they're not as effective. This guy balls out no matter what map it is, what opponent it is, how his team's playing, how his teammates are playing. That's just talent, guys. That's talent and dedication. So mad props to him, because people have been making the point, but it's sort of accurate. When you consider like the drop-off of the Nikos of the world, the fact that Heroic doesn't get that far, so Stown doesn't have as much opportunity. Dude, Blamef is legitimately a contender for best rifle player in CSGO. I think you have to say that. I think it's a legit statement.
It's wild to think.
Because like I say, he just puts up the numbers every time, mate. You can just rely on him.
It's terrific to see. I mean, he's the second highest rated player in the tournament right now. But like, Config is right up there with him. Also, Config doing a fantastic job with opening kills this tournament.
Of course.
Really sick to see. Like, he has got that kind of brutal aim, his brutal style, where he can just brute force his way into situations and win them. Like, it's really cool to see that from Config, because obviously there was a lot of skepticism as to his shape going into this tournament recently, whether he's bounced back or not ever since the hand surgery, ever since, that kind of put a halt to his momentum. He seems to be coming back into his own. But I mean, I guess if we're going to mention Astralis, like, we kind of do have to talk about Zipnix and the fact that he's just having a tournament all of a sudden. Like, this is the best.
This is like a throwback, for sure.
This is the best performance he's had in a year and a half or something. Yeah. So all of a sudden, if you've actually got the players who are stepping in, it kind of makes up for, Glaive is, he's calling the shots. He's got a lot on his plate, but also, like you say, Ferdig, maybe, he has some experience, but he's not going to be that kind of guy who's front running and taking charge. So all of a sudden, if you've got like the experience of Zipnix, the king of clutch, maybe making a return to the throne, as well as Config and Blamef, Astralis are cooking with gas. Like, they could actually make this competitive. It's a really entertaining sort of scenario to think about.
And also think about some of the matchup angles. Like, here's the problem. Mouse as a team have done another great job. Look at all the teams they've beaten to get to this point. But if I have to look at IGLs, look, you can think what you like about Glaive, and obviously it's not a great sign that someone's calling instead of him on Mirage. but he's better than Dexter. Like Dexter, unfortunately, just never really been able to show us anything world class. In fact, I would actually say if you look at some of the talents he's had, I've been a bit underwhelmed with what he's done with his squads. Then you go and look at the AWPers. Like, yeah, Farlig isn't fucking simple, obviously. I don't think the Torji guy's that much better. And the Torji guy's really inexperienced. So, like, that's a push for me. So I actually think, for real, the edges are slightly on Astralis' favour anyway. And then you add in the stage factor for me. Until I see that Mouse can do it on that stage, I have to heavily favour Astralis. I'll even throw this in as well, Samler. A lot of people were doing this angle where, because Mouse used to be Mousesports, the German team way back in Counter-Strike history, they were like, oh, it's cool though, because JDC is German and he's going to be there. Right, mate, this is where y'all have watched too many movies. Yeah, in the movie, you're German and you go in front of the German crowd and you tear it up and they're all chanting your name, JDC. You know what happens in real life? You go on that stage and your asshole gets so tiny, you could fucking fit Astralis' integrity through it. So I think how small that'd have to be. So at that point, because remember, it can always go the other way on that one. You can get intimidated by that. That'd be really scary if you've never played many lands. You're in a tier 1 team playing against, by the way, legendary players who won 4 majors, and you're on a massive stage in your home country. That could go the other way. Like I always have to reserve judgment to see how those players are going to do. Sometimes you sink when you get dropped in the deep end like that.
Yeah, it is definitely. That's definitely like. Where it gets really fun. I hope you mentioned Dexter. I was kind of watching some tape again of him real quick just to refresh my memory going into the playoffs. But it's like he actually has been something's come over that guy. He's actually stepped up in an individual level. He seems to be getting way more comfortable and he's getting some pretty impactful frags. So just cool to see that he's kind of coming into his own. Unfortunately, I think a lot of what Mouse is going to have to face is going to be the similar scenario to what Movie Star Riders are going to have to deal with, where Mousesports, the players that are really making waves on this team come from the academy team, which is one of the few success stories actually from Mousesports and the academy team, like actually working. Because if anybody, if anybody's been following this, or if you haven't been following it, the We Play Academy system is really solid. It's a great tournament, great production value, and they've been doing a really good job. Mouse is just dominant there.
They were like far away the best, right?
They are the best.
I think people do not, you know, the one thing people seem to miss. I don't think they understood that. As far as I knew, wasn't it basically just that Cosmonacy was on the Na'Vi team? That's what made that team good. It was Mouse the team though. Mouse had like the whole squad were mega, right?
Exactly. And a couple of these players,
even some of the people who don't play now, like the Exertion guy, look fucking. He's not even in the team. He's in the academy squad still. Yeah,
he's in the academy squad exactly. And like Shuhei and those guys are really solid. It's been fun to watch them. But like those players, that are coming into Mousesports now, they have just a little bit of experience, right? Remember, because it was like we were trying to work our way out from Rona, and so they were getting into that LAN environment where you're starting to play in a studio environment. There's no fans, but it's still a studio. You can still hear each other shout, so they're used to that. I think, right? Like guys like Torzi and JDC, like they're used to that environment, and that's what they've had so far up in Cologne. Because the players have been able to shout at each other. They've been in that kind of studio environment where they've been playing. And so that's fine. That's par for the course as far as these guys are concerned. They're used to that. Now it's going to be that next level. Now it's going to be the real deal. You're going to be on one of the biggest stages in Counter-Strike with 15,000 fans in front of you. That's going to be, I think, the difference maker here, where not only will there have been 4 days for Astralis to get prepped, Glaive, come on, Glaive is going to be going through all the demos, trying to figure out what he needs to hit and how to unravel your game. So there's going to be days of prep ready for Astralis to get into it, and then just that stage pressure. I think it's like I don't want to write him off completely. It's already an enormous achievement to have made it this far, and the upset is always possible. But I do think that, like, realistically, it should be Astralis and it should be Liquid moving into the semis over these teams. Yes. It could be a slugfest, but I think the stage atmosphere and the LAN CS in front of an audience is going to be too much of a factor for Mouse and Movie Star.
I'll even give you an angle as well that people often won't think about, which is when you're in a big stage setup like this, and if you're the underdog team, things will get really out of control. You can be all anxious, having bad rounds. I think it's also important that your coach has experience, because I'll tell you what, I was watching this the other day. There's still teams in professional Counter-Strike who barely take any time out. So they're just getting plowed like 7 rounds in a row. What they're doing isn't working. But they just sort of like just forget timeouts exist and just bang their head against the wall. Well, here's the thing. A veteran coach knows when you take the time out, even for like the American sports reason, you cool the other team off, you cool your own team off, you give a guy a breather, or you give him a piece of advice. What people mistake is this, Semler. They're thinking I'm talking about a timeout, like you call out, like, right, here's the play. It's fucking 2 on last innings. We're not talking about like a tactic. We mean like emotional control, like manage the actual players. Like if you can do that well in a stage setup, you give your team a chance. But the problem is a lot of these coaches also are going to be total noobs to that. Like they've never been on this big stage setting. They don't maybe know know that when you go down 0-5, that's you take a timeout no matter what, because you have to get your team back in the game. You got to get their heads back into it. You got to let them know this is slipping away. Like that's where the match becomes different from the tournament area. Because again, tournament area is different than your bedroom, but it's a little bit more comfortable than a stadium.
Without a doubt. Totally. And also because everything is taken care of, you have your PC, you're able to warm up, you're able to do all that sort of stuff. It's on your own time. It's a totally different environment from a stage setup where you have to sit down and be ready to go in 5 minutes. Like that's kind of like the old stuff that Lerp has actually talked about. Like every mark that a pro should be able to sit down and be ready to play and ready to compete in 5 minutes time. Right. And that's a mark of a professional. And that's kind of like where you're going to have to do that. And now you're going to have that fan interaction. And also you're going to have to be able to deal with that adrenaline, that hit that you're going to get. Kerrigan can horse around all he wants because he's done that, every day
exactly.
for like 10 years. He knows how to play the crowd. He knows that's his environment. He thrives in that environment. But, somebody doing that for the first time, the adrenaline dump, the beginning of the game might be a bit rocky for these players because it's a totally different beast. And I'm actually kind of curious on like the production side of things, just to see what ESL do for the stage at Cologne, just because Blast have pushed the bar pretty high now in terms of stage production, at least, and like entry and ambiance and just badassery. So from that, it just occurred to me now thinking about it. It's like, it's going to be kind of cool to see what I hope that it's going to be cool to see what ESL have done, considering, they really do make Cologne such a big deal in their calendar. Like this is pretty much like the event of the year outside of the majors. So I hope they haven't held back and that the stage is going to be something totally badass that's just going to put the players on a pedestal and just make it awesome. Well, talking about players that have actually been put on a pedestal, I've got a couple of tabs here that are open for Yakinder. And there's been so much focus on this guy going into this tournament, as in he is now standing in for Liquid. He himself has said in interviews that he wants to, if the option is there, that he wants to stay. But he's also been pretty vocal about like the difference between VP and Liquid in terms of ambiance, like mindset, and how the team behaves. Right? He's been saying, like on VP, we worked, we were professional, we showed up, we worked a lot, and we won, we did good. Right? Whereas on Liquid, it's already a little bit more laid back. People are sharing how their day went and all that. And I don't know if I'm just like, if I'm cynical or what, but I'm hearing him say this. I'm just like, no, this is shit. Like this is not going to be good. If there's too much friendliness going on the players, are they going to be cutthroat or not? But in that same interview, Yakinder says, like I've had to kick some ass as well and make sure that these guys are like dialed in. And so for a moment there, I was kind of just sitting there thinking maybe Yakinder is the only one who can do that with the North Americans, because apparently the coaches with North American teams don't really have too much of a say, especially with considering how long the history they have with most of the players, like Adren, Daps. They all know each other for years. Like what are they going to say? Shocks, did he have that kind of weight given, like I don't know if Shocks is confrontational in that way, whatever. Yakinder rolling in, maybe he is that kind of guy who's just going to roll in and be like, right, this is, I don't have, feelings. What are those? We're here to play a game and win. And I'm going to tell you how to do it because that's what we did. While you guys were getting knocked out last in the major, we were actually kind of competitive over there. So let me go ahead and bring it out on the table. So like, what do you make? What's your takeaway here from Yakinder? Because that's what I was quickly thinking. I was like, I think Yakinder actually could be the difference maker for Liquid, where he can kind of like no fluff, just give it straight to the players on that team, and those players have to respect him because Yakinder wasn't messing around. Like he brings the heat.
Sure.
So like it could be interesting as an addition.
Okay, I've got a few angles on this. So one is basically I've heard. No, by the way,
okay.
in case you don't know the translation key for by the numbers, when I say I heard, it means I did behind the scenes get this info, but I'm not reporting it as news. This is not an official investigative report. I have not corroborated all sources. It's just something I heard, and you take it as hearsay essentially. But it's from one of the most legit people in the history of esports. So, and some would even say esports living avatar. But anyway, here's what I heard. I heard that some of the teams that were in the Yakinder lottery all bidding for him and trying to negotiate. I heard some of them, the reason some might in fact have chosen to not go with him is they actually think he might be a tiny bit difficult to deal with, and he's got a little bit of an ego, which is an interesting detail because obviously he has killed it in all his interviews and all the fans think the opposite, that he's the best guy ever. Basically, he's done a blame F where he's nailed the first few like interactions with fans, and now that rep will carry you forever. So here's the thing. I will say, if you even look at the way he comments, like famously that one last year when he was doing that event where he tried to sort of like clap back at Yanko when Yanko said he was making like an FPL player down mid, like there has definitely been a little bit of attitude where I can sense there's something to that. But I will say, by the way, this isn't like a diss. I'm just saying it to set up this next point, because basically a lot of people who are very good at the game and very diligent, they're going to be demanding like that. They are going to have high standards. They are going to want things done their way because they are the one in the gym putting in the hours, and you are the guy who just turns up and plays with them. So they get to make more demands. Now, the VP point I thought was a very interesting one, because a lot of fans won't know this, but the core of VP, long before they got Yakinda, when they were the Vanguard team that made that run to the final of Starladder Berlin, a detail a lot of fans don't know is the core of that team had played together for years before that, when they were just nobodies in tier 2. And they were just all together. I think they even used to live in a team house, and they just used to grind all the time. And even when they got Yakinda, people will know they were grinding online. They were playing every online qualifier, every cup. No, they used to play religiously. At them and Gambit, those guys earned their status at the top. They just fought their way there, like climbing out of Bane's pit or something. Like that was incredible the way those guys grinded up from tier 2, because it should be the opposite. You should get burned out in tier 2 and then have nothing left. They got themselves to tier 1. So I will say, I do get the sense he probably has a way higher threshold for like grinding and raw practice and hours put into the server. In fact, like I say about the Blame F analogy, he's someone where the perception of fans, as well as he is a guy who's studying the game, watching demos, watching his own demos back, trying to figure out the other team. There's a lot of pros, if they're not the IGL, they aren't doing that. They're taking part in a review session, or they're reading the notes, or they read what Blade gives them in a folder. They're not necessarily in the demos all the time, though. So like, I do sort of get the vibe that he knows Team Liquid's very different to VP, but this is where I think it's very interesting, because I've got a different take to other people, Semler.
Okay.
I actually get the vibe that it is on the table for him to join Liquid, but that's why he's being vocal about this stuff now. Because it's like, think about it, right? If you already join, I mean, just ask the guys from EG, like my boy fucking Malik. You shit out of luck if you already signed the paper and then it doesn't work out. Now you just got, you're trapped in like a loveless marriage, basically. In this scenario, I almost think what Yakindar's trying to do is he's trying to sort of like prod a little bit before he's officially joined, so you can see how do they take it. Like will they respond? Will they be receptive to it? Will they embrace it? Will they actually do what he wants? Will they adjust a little bit? Because if they do that, maybe this is the right team for him. But I have to say, if you're in the position he was, this is why it's a bit tricky for me. Because remember, the original story was like he could join Na'Vi, or he could join G2, or he could join Vitality. Right? Yeah. Listen, when you then go, oh, Team Liquid, it's like, well, which one of those is the fucking odd one out? Like, Team Liquid is like they haven't been anything for a while, mate. The others have some of the best players in the world, and you could maybe go to number 1. You could win the major. So if I'm Yakinda, I would be a bit discriminate about joining Team Liquid. You shouldn't just join this like if someone asked me to join G2, I'd sign the paper and join tomorrow. Like, look, me and Nico will figure it out, like without Mega. But if I'm joining Team Liquid and I've seen all these last signings they've had the last couple of years, I think you should take care of yourself before you join. You saw what happened to Grim, Fallen, fucking Shocks now. Like, it hasn't gone great for these guys. They just gradually wither away, and then they get booted. And when you get booted, by the way, your stock goes to nothing. Nobody wants you at that
because
point.
Nobody has your back. We saw that with Stewie and Elige, with how they treated Grim. Like, they didn't have his back at all. It was just, they were kicking him on the way out. Like, get the fuck out of here. And so that can't really bode well either. You know, you can't really be looking at that like, this is the team. This is where I have to be. And it's obviously, it's like, you're not going to read too much into it, right?
Oh, of course.
But there was a good interview put up with Yakinder, where on the last question, there's like, one final question about your teammates, who has impressed you the most, and he immediately goes to OC and just sings OC's praises. And if I'm thinking about anybody on Liquid who's going to be putting in the work, it could be OC as well, considering he's the new guy and he has to grind as well. Sure. He's got a lot to prove in this tournament, and he really needs to show that he needs to stay here, right? So like, that was interesting. But like, mentioning the guys who may,
and also I will say this as well: if you're OC, you have to understand, when you come into the meeting room, yours is one of the chairs with like the trapdoor equipped underneath. Like, why don't Elige and NAF have those on their chairs though? Like, listen, exactly. OC, that's your seat for a moment. Like, that's also know that you're in Team Liquid. Yeah,
I'm like, this is obvious. You take it for what it is, because obviously, like, people are just gonna say things off the cuff. But like, the fact that he leaves, like, oh, obviously NAF and Nitro, I spent a lot of time with them as well, because that's at the end, because he's like, I worked a lot with OC, I worked a lot with Elige too, we really got along, and he's like, oh yeah, and NAF too. It's like, it just makes you think that NAF would be one of those guys who's there for the review session. He's there for maybe like the strategy talk, but barring that, he's probably up watching Netflix or something.
He's watching The Mandalorian while you're in the demos, mate. Exactly. I know. It's like, exactly, it's got season 2 finished. Like, brilliant. Oh,
great. I'm just watching this Overpass game, trying to figure out what the fuck these guys are gonna do against us.
Exactly. I know.
I was wondering if that's like, how much do you read into these kinds of interviews? How much do you read into it? But I was kind of laughing a little bit, thinking like, is this, like you say, is this him kind of like poking a little bit? You can just like, like what,
I will say though, if you want to go on in-game stuff, this would be the game changer for Team Liquid. But you've already seen it with this tournament, and I already think if you just look at the knock-on effect on fucking Elige, mate. I mean, he was a guy who already was like, he had a bit of the cold zero, and if you don't know, he's best when he sort of follows someone else up, then he's going to clean up the kills because he's such a mega rifler. You put a player like Yikinder in, he's going to become an MVP candidate again. He's going to be right up in the mix because obviously Team Liquid at their best, Elige was like a top 10 at least, maybe top 5 player in the world at times. Like, this guy used to be right up there with the Nicos of the world. We were talking about in that category. So if that helps put that back in place, brilliant already. And then also, I personally think the angle people are missing on this squad is, I always thought Team Liquid's biggest flaw, it's why I understand why they got Stewie back in the day, was they always had they never had that many aggressive players, they tend to have the more defensive / passive players who just sort of like let the game come to them. Yekindar is the opposite. So what's great is just like how we offset James, like extreme passive play, I think he actually he brings Team Liquid the element they desperately needed. They needed like an aggressive player who can just entry.
Yeah, I think
open so much of the game up.
I think you're bang on the money because the stats reflect it with Elige and his performance. He's 4th rated right now in the tournament, and we got to credit where credit is due. You got to give the nod to that Mirage performance from him. Holy shit, like that was unreal, the rounds that he was being able to pull out. But a lot of the times you notice, like, if Elige has room to work, if he's got guys who not only can create space for him but can like stay alive and give him room to maneuver, Elige is alive a lot, but he's also getting a lot of value out of that, and he's winning you rounds. He's getting you the kills, and he's winning the rounds. So, his KDA is awesome, but that's because he's got those teammates creating the room for him as well. He's like one of those guys who really needs that point man to go in. Kind of reminds me of like Taco and Cold Zero a little bit, something like that. That kind of vibe, that kind of similar vibe where Cold just lights up because he's got that guy. Curiously enough, we'll see how Nation does now that they're reunited. That's pretty cool. But that aside,
by the way, I'll give credit because I often like to repeat when fans. So here's the sad thing, especially because obviously, like now I'm stuck in the Matthew McConaughey dazed and confused fucking scenario where it's like,
all right,
the older I get, the fucking morons on Twitter just stay the same age. That's my fucking life now, isn't it? So obviously the jokes get less funny as I become further away from Azuma, don't they? But every now and then, the internet obviously is undefeated. It will every now and then generate a brilliant, it will sort of retard crowd source a joke, and a joke will emerge from the depth,
the typewriter,
the consciousness of fucking the scene. And they came up with a good one, Sembler, which was because all these teams have shit the bed from Brazil. Even Furia's not doing well. They're all shitting the bed, right? Because the 0-0 Nation team actually was one of the only ones doing well. Here's the joke that they've helped. They created the punchline. I created the joke. The question goes, why is 0-0 Nation? Why would it be fitting for 0-0 Nation to be the best Brazilian team? They are a nation of zeros. Whoever came up with that, props. It was just some random guy on Twitter. So I don't know his name, unfortunately, but whoever it was, well done. Well played. That punchline is legit. That is a legit punchline.
Well played.
Yes. Got to give it up, right? Yeah. Every now and then they make the comedian laugh. It's all right.
There you go. Yeah, that's what's possible. That's a good one. I mean, it is really fun to see them back in the mix. Like Taco and it just feels like a stroll down memory lane, and also the fact that we had them go up against Immortals, like the Fallen
Imperial
or is Imperial. That's it. Yeah, Fallen FNX and head to head.
Although that also did crack me the fuck up as well.
I was just waiting for Dead to jump out of a closet somewhere.
Just think about well, the joke is he was probably just floating around the server watching all one. I mean, in his case, he probably even said, "Look, I used to do it against the other team we owned. Like that guy used to be my player. I should be able to watch his POV. What about the old days?" Probably just some whack angle like that. No, but here's the joke, right? This is why The Last Dance was one of the shittest ideas of all time. First of all, you are aware, last. The whole premise of that was it was one last season. Y'all are just in a team and you're just going to stay till the fucking bitter end, till they fucking pry those massive checks out your bloody cold, very much dead in the game hands, right? So that's now, first of all, already, we know this ain't no Last Dance. Y'all are just milking this. Second, because you're going to play a second major now, apparently. Like, what's the last part of it mean, you fuck? The last, which one, anyway. So the other part is this, right? Which is within the context of The Last Dance. They didn't even do it similar. The Last Dance premise was the Bulls stayed together with the core for one last year. This is The Last Dance without Michael Jordan. And even better, Michael Jordan came and beat you. This is the stupidest team of all time because all you need to know about how bad that original core would be in today's Counter-Strike, the team with the least of the players from the actual original team won the game. The one that only had 2 of the classic lineup beat the one with 3. That makes you all look like you're washed. You're not very good anymore. Because the joke is, if you look at 0-0 Nation, it's not even that Cold Zero and Taco carry. It's the other bloody players. It's the players from the Godsend lineup, etc. Like, it's those guys. It's the new school ones that actually carry. So if anything, the lesson, and this is where in esports we're never going to get it, we've all on broadcast made the whole storyline about the washed players stealing checks. Meanwhile, the other players in the server are actually the good ones at Counter-Strike that are winning the game. Like, we've lost the point here, guys. So anyway, that's by the by. Because sadly, in general, Brazilian Counter-Strike's in a really bad spot. Like,
it is, yeah.
Basically, the only hope they had left was Furia. And Fury, I don't know what happened to them after the major, mate. They just dropped off a cliff. They've gotten really bad now. Art is playing really terrible Counter-Strike every time I see him. Like, he just looks, I don't know what his game's, it's just hit some sort of a rot. He's just done right now.
It may very well be that it's just, this player break is what they need. They're probably going to fly back home to Brazil. They're going to just sit on the beach for a couple of weeks.
I have heard they grind a lot because I know they come up with a lot of innovative stuff like loads of smokes and shit. So I would assume they put in the hours, sure.
Yeah, no, without, I mean, at this point, like, those are the guys who are just also living out of hotels and living
in
apartments and Airbnbs or whatever all year. So they don't have anything else to do but innovate, but try and come up with something new. And fair, like, got to give a little bit of credit though, because I mean, it feels like every time I watch, Safe is trying to make something happen. K Serato still trying to make something happen. Like, those guys are still coming up with numbers and still coming up with plays. So it's not like the whole team is a wash. Like, there's still some weight on Fury that's getting thrown around, which is, why they are making things competitive and why they aren't just getting rolled everywhere, left, right, and center. But it does suck to see, like, I mean, I don't know, like, they're not in it because this is still just like a top 8, like it's a top 6. Like, otherwise we'd be saying like they're top 8 in the tournament. Because if you look at how the groups play out, it's only 6 teams that move on, but there's another 2 teams that get knocked out in that process on either side. And it's just like, I'm just thinking like they'd still make the cut, right? Like, it would still be pretty sick to see those guys, like, it's still a top 8 in Cologne if Cologne wasn't running this.
The problem they have though, Semler, is exactly that. Is if you notice, like, the team, when they're in their best, Furia, they look like a dark horse to win the tournament. Like, wow, but they never do. That's the problem. Like, the best they do is they might make a semi-final run.
They're like tradesmen in that sense, right?
They never sort of make good on the promise though and actually do the run, and win the tournament.
But do you think they're just tradesmen in that point? Like, there are just those teams that are just mid of the pack, and they don't ever quite find what it is that's going to put them over the edge. The way that the stars align. It's funny. We were looking at it this morning, just going over like Columbus 2016 results, right? Where it's just, Na'Vi. I mean, that looked like Na'Vi, like that.
Oh,
they were
for sure.
Take that tournament, right? And then everything aligns. It's just the perfect run for Luminosity, and somehow the Brazilians take it, and it's just like everything just came together. I still remember watching Guardian just bawling his eyes out in the parking lot and back in the tournament because it's like they were that close.
Sure.
It was within their grasp, and that was Pete Guardian as well, like total freak, and it still wasn't enough.
I mean, he had that injury as well, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that. It's still just like they were so close.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
So I mean, like, I guess it's just those teams that are kind of just waiting, like they're in the wings, and it's like, what's the move now if you're in Brazil? Because, like, what is the move for Furia? I haven't actually tried to answer that question.
The problem is, in theory, they've already made it, haven't they? They made their roster move, and this is the lineup they've bought for this year. The real issue they've had is, like a lot of teams, you notice the real problem with the end of last year was it was really exciting because almost every top team, except like Na'Vi and fucking Gambit or whatever, almost every top team made a roster change. It's just most of them didn't work, if you notice. They sort of like only got better relative to the field, but not that many teams went to the top of the scene. And Fury is one of them because actually the safe move. Here's the problem. I can't say it didn't work because they needed an AWP and he's doing okay, but he's not the player they thought he was going to be. Because dude, on Pain, he was fucking like, he was just hard carrying some games. He was looking really like what you thought was, wow, if you add that AWPing to the rifle core they have, it's game over. Like they're gonna like they could win the major. They could be in the final of every ESL event, but somehow he's come over and he's been good or decent, but he hasn't been like a star AWPer. So in general, in their team, like Keserato's had a little bit of a fall off. Art style's a bit fucked. He's the IGL, obviously. So at the moment, I actually feel like they've missed their window because they should have been feasting on all these teams with the whack line, like the G2s and the Vitalities of the world that never probably. This is where you have your window to feast on those guys. Same thing, by the way, with the Outsiders VP guys before they had to make their roster moves. I also thought that was another move. Like their lineup looked like it was that close. and then they never quite made it. They just stayed there. Like they just stayed. That's another thing to talk about as an abstract concept, though. That is something, if you notice, in esports and in sports in general, is it's why famously people often say that at the top level, even physical sports are like mainly mental. What they mean is to be at the top level, you all have to meet a basic athletic threshold and be able to do moves and techniques and stuff. So the point is, at that level, it becomes who has the mindset for it, who can overcome pressure. An example would be like, and you know what? One thing I've always found very telling, you know, when players in interviews, they used, like Fury is the best example, because Fury used to be an upset team. They used to be a team where if they made top 8, wow, nice job, you probably beat a couple of bigger names. The problem is, though, you know, they always say in interviews, like, we actually prefer being the underdog because there's less pressure. Like, that's okay when you are the underdog. When you actually become the favorite, you don't get that anymore because you are expected to win now. And that's my problem with Furia. So when they got to the stage where they're supposed to win, they're supposed to like have a chance to raise a trophy. So it's supposed to be able to be the best team in the world. That's supposed to be on the cards. These are Brazil's best players. It hasn't happened. For some reason, they have never gotten past some sort of a mental block.
I mean, it's like, it kind of it's weird. It reminds me of like the weird, pre-Astralis era Danes.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
For whatever
this has happened with some great lineups as well, yeah.
They had a mental block they couldn't get over, and then all of a sudden they won one tournament, and that's all it took. That's all it took to just be like, okay, now it's the time, and they just take off from there and start dominating, and it's the beginning of the story in a sense. But it took years for them to get to that point. And the question, I guess, is whether or not Fury are in that same bind where they just need the stars to align. They need that one tournament to click, and then they can just take off running and go from there. Because you're right, it does feel like there's the firepower on that team. It does feel like they should be able to bring it to the table and actually
they've got the pieces. In my opinion,
they've got the pieces. It feels like it. You look at it, and it's like, yeah, they do have the pieces. And I mean, we've given Art some, let's say we've given Art some guff. I don't know, some criticism in the past for being a little bit too one-dimensional in his play. But, you know, I watched a couple maps of them this tournament, and I mean, he looked solid in the sense that he wasn't trying to just randomly do stuff. It did feel like there was a bit more of a team element going on in his game, and that it wasn't just him throwing himself away left, right, and center. So
I actually feel sorry for Fury for this reason, though. I'll tie it back into something I was talking about with a different point. This is a perfect example, by the way. This team and the Heroic team are the two teams, and Gambit. Those are the three squads I feel the most sorry for in World Counter-Strike, because exactly when these teams were rising and the players were ready to become potentially top LAN players, they had a year and a half where we barely played any LANs. And Fury especially, because they, if you remember, their lineup came up the year before we went online. So this was like essentially 2020 and 2021 would have been their chance to do what they're doing now. It's like you have the run to the semis, you have the run to the quarters, didn't quite make it. But we're in a major, we're supposed to make it, didn't quite make it. But when you put in the reps, when you get like 3 or 4 majors under your belt, when you get like 20 LANs under your belt, when you've been to all the pro leagues and the Colognes and the Katowices, like you say about the Astralis lineup, it's not like they did it in 1 year and then the next year they were there. It took them 3 or 4 years to get there. Like you have to put some people. Here's the thing: some people are naturals. Some people have to do it the hard way and learn and just develop that way. And by the way, the great example, just like in life, Astralis weren't the naturals when it came to poise, but when they leveled up, they became the absolute best ever at it. Because the same in real life. You know, when you're not someone who's naturally good at something, when you have to learn the hard way, sometimes you learn the technique better. You actually put in more hours, you're more cognizant of what you're doing, you reflect more on it, you grind it more because it's not easy. It doesn't come to you easily. Whereas sometimes when it comes to you easily, I think you could even say the careers of people like Shocks are examples of this. When it comes too easily, you can be a bit frivolous. You can have times where you don't put in the hours. You can have times, whatever, I'm off my game. Kenny S used to literally just tell me sometimes, I know this sounds fucking insane, but he's just a legit guy. He would just tell me like, I mean, the team's not doing very well at the moment anyway, so why would I grind now? And I'd be like, I mean, look, I don't fuck with that, Kenny. That's all I see what you mean. Like, yeah, your logic is why would I put in the 80-hour week if we're going to come 8th anyway? Like, we're going to come 9th and just put in half as much. The problem is, though, like, you need those years of reps of doing this, basically. And as I say, what we've sort of done with Furia is it feels like they've had this really long career because they came up in 2019, it's 2022, they haven't. Like, half their career got stolen from them, where they would have learned these things they would have had. Because the other thing, like you said earlier about Karrigan, that's a really subtle point fans don't get. Karrigan is simultaneously calling a game, a chess match between him and the other IGL, playing the game as an entry fragger, and then in between that, when something funny happens, turning and being a fucking actor and charismatic on camera for 5 seconds and then back in the game. That's a skill, guys. That takes a lot of fucking reps and hours. And crucially, when he does it, that has to not throw him off. Because there's another thing
Exactly.
people don't know. You know how many times someone's done a big round at a tournament on a stage and gotten up and made like a big woo, but then they shit the bed in the next round, like you get shot in the back of the head, you lose your AWP weapon. That then has the opposite effect. Now there's more pressure on you because you've sort of made a big spectacle out of you. You put yourself in the spotlight. Like that's why, as you say, when you're the mega pros, the Tazes of the world, JW, Carragher, those guys are also like master entertainers. Like mad props that multitasking they're doing. That is really impressive to me.
Yeah, shit, yeah. Now that you mention it, it's really cool to see that like the OG guys like JW and Taz, like those were glory days as well, because that was Taz. His whole strategy was like, I let my teammates play the game. My game is to get inside of their heads, and so you just hear him shouting at lands at the other players and shit, like face to face with them. Oh man, it's like totally different times, man. Because that is actually an element. I mean, obviously, like, or what are we talking about? It's that element where now we're on the stage, and that's definitely a big thing, and we've got the fans, awesome, right, and all, but like the players, because there's the commentary piped in, they always have to have the soundproof headsets on. So there was that time when the players could just straight up hear each other shout at each other all the time as well, and that was something you had to take into account.
Do you want to know something fucked up? This is the sort of shit that By the Numbers is for, by the way. I'll tell you another rule of By the Numbers now that you're the new guest in the camp, Semler. We have a rule that Richard always used to say, which is, even though it's true, if people don't know, the reason why By the Numbers was always edited and would come out with bits cut out is because if there's any part they thought was like too close or over the line and we'd get in trouble, they would just edit it out. I wasn't part of the pro. No, they would also do it for this as well, though. They would edit some of the parts out, right? Now, I will say, I don't personally have plans to do that in general. Whatever we say, it's just something we probably stand by. We will, though, as an aside, one thing we didn't discuss earlier as well is this episode's recorded before. We might start doing them live again, though. I'd be up for that if we can find a day and a time that works. It'll just depend on scheduling, but I'd be up for potentially doing it. And one last thing to say as well. Obviously, since we removed the Patreon, we will do viewer questions, but that's going to be by the Grog coin, which is that cryptocurrency you can buy within our company. Go to the Insight and Esports Discord, go to the Grog channel coin, Grog coin channel, and there's like a pinned thing explaining how you buy it. Basically, if you buy 25 of them, you can put you can put a question in this channel, and at the end we'll ask a few of them and we'll answer them. Anyway, that's by the by. The point I was going to bring back to was this. Where was I before that? Where was I before we were talking about that? I've been tired, by the way, so I'm not at my peak right now. I'm trying to think what we were talking about a minute ago, though.
We were talking about impacts of players, and we were talking about Furia and their current state and the things, and Kerrigan, the showboating, and how that's also a skill that comes with reps and time.
Oh, and one thing I would even say is that's an area where people might not know. In esports, CSGO players are particularly good at that, by the way, because in games like League of Legends, where they also have a camera, if you don't know, here's what it's like to be the player. You're sat like I am at a PC now, and the whole time you're playing and during the entire stage match, guys are walking up with big cameras and they're shining, right? But so what you learn as the pro is you learn to see when the red light comes on. When that red light comes on the camera, you know he's recording you. You have to then react. Even League of Legends pros aren't as good as the CSGO pros are at that bit. They've all got, because these guys have got years of practice doing it. And then, here's the other thing I was going to say. So first of all, you never hold any fire back on this show. If you have a fire joke, even if it's a bit edgy, you always say it. That's the rule. Because like we'll help Sam. Sam will figure out if it's over the line or not. Like, but here's the joke that I was going to make. I actually think that this is an element I don't like about CSGO pros, Semler. You know, in the modern day, CSGO pros have spent too many events together, having drinks in the bar and being all friendly. And they're all like, it's the same complaint people actually have about the NBA now, Semler, which is because all the stars grow up playing the same like high school and college level tournaments. They're basically mates when they get to the NBA. So even though they should be like enemies, like, oh, I'm on the Lakers, you're on the Celtics, they're actually just mates. Like once the game's over, they're like, oh, dap it up, like, oh, see you in the off season, bro, which is like, look, that's fine for their life. But if you're the fan, you're sort of like, this is sort of like, remember, these games are a proxy for war. You're sort of like sucking away some of the rivalry there. Indeed. So here's the problem. I hate in CSGO, like at the PGL Stockholm Major. Do you remember before the final where they brought out Nico and they brought out Simple and they were both stood there and they asked them like, they were like, oh, what do you want to say to your opponent in this match? And instead of saying something like, well, Nico, you know, before this match, neither of us have majors. After this, I will have a major. I would say something like that, like some straight fire banter, right? Instead, they were all doing the opposite. They were all going, like Simple was going, I just hope it's a good game for both teams and both people are doing what I'm like, what even is this? Like, do you want to win, bro? So I have to say, I would be way more ruthless than any of these pros. Like, you know what I would do if I'm the Astralis guys? And we're at Cologne, if you don't know, again, I'll give you some behind the scenes. You both stood behind the stage. They're on this side, you're on this side, on the different sides. You've got a stage manager who's literally waiting for for a cue from the producer. And when he scores, like, go now, like, first team's going to walk through. In that moment, right, when you could, in theory, talk to them and stuff, I would just go up to, like, mega inexperienced player like JDC if I'm Glaive, and I'd just go, it's great to see you here. Just whatever you do, don't choke. And then I would just walk off. I wouldn't say anything. I would just ice this motherfucker before the game. I don't know why people don't do that, dude. I would really fuck with him. Or I'd go up to him, and even better is if you do it sort of a bit shitty, like you're expressing fake concern. Like, what you do is you go up again to a, like, inexperienced player. So go up to, like, the Torji guy, and you just go like, look, it can get to your head a little bit when you look out in that crowd and see all those faces staring back. But just remember, it can only last a few hours. And then you walk away. Again, you just all I want to do is put the thought in his mind that just blows it, just mental boom instantly. Sadly, in the modern day, it's all like sportsmanship and stuff. They all want to have a good game, apparently.
Yeah.
I don't. I want my opponent to mentally fold and question his whole existential existence before the game. That's what I want. And then I'll just take the easy win. I'll take that free money. Thanks. I'll play a Counter-Strike against someone else in the next round.
This sounds a lot like the School of Harding as well.
I would love that. Yeah.
Just mental games the entire way through, dude. How can you talk shit and get in their heads? I mean, do you think that okay, again, like showmanship, right? But I think that is going to be Na'Vi and FaZe in the final.
Oh,
I think it's going to be Na'Vi and FaZe.
Here's the thing, though. That's good, because right now in World Counter-Strike, those are the only two teams you can really rely on. When they look good, they look really good. Yeah. And also, they have a really good rivalry. People have missed this. You know, they've met in almost every tournament this year. Like, this team just constantly runs into each other. And obviously, it's now been back and forth. Originally, FaZe was beating Na'Vi every time. Now Na'Vi's getting the win. So I actually, put it this way, I really hope that is the final, because I think that could be an amazing, remember, it's a best of 5 on LAN as well. Like, that could be a fucking amazing final. And by the way, I don't know when this episode comes out, probably not by then, but if the episode's out, I'm actually doing a watch party for the final, but we'll see. I don't know if this episode will be out by then or not. Again, I don't know. Sam's movements are like God, mysterious. His own, doesn't communicate, does he? Does what he wants. Nah, he'll figure it out. He'll get it sorted.
We'll get in there. But I mean,
oh, and by the way, I will add that as well as a last detail. Even though we don't do the Patreon anymore, as I said, like, it's not a fan-supported show anymore. Like, we've got all the sponsors and stuff now. We're doing the company approach. That's another good reason, by the way, to keep by the numbers going. I'm able to keep Sam employed and give him some money and help him stay in the industry and do some work. And obviously, this was his show as well. He was here from the right. If people don't know, that's actually also, I think we might have even been assigned him as like a guy, right? When we first started by the numbers. I think that's even part of like how we got to work with him, because he was like working with Richard on something else, and he was like the producer. So to me, he's also part of the show, even if he's not on camera now, obviously. And obviously, he's not recording. If you don't know, he's not actually recording this episode with us now, so you're not going to hear him laugh or whatever. But if we do it live again, he can also do that. He can have the Sam fucking cackle when it says some outrageous, you know? Yeah,
exactly. That is
because we do need that actually as well. Because if you don't know, I've always admitted this, a flaw of mine, unfortunately. If people don't know this is actually how you should know how much work I've put into building up my charismatic persona. Because the problem is, if I don't actively do that, Semler, like when I hear something funny, I do think it's funny in my mind, but I'm the guy where I just think inside my mind, haha, that's funny. So that's why, unfortunately, I look like a cunt. I always laugh at my own jokes, because then I just tickle myself till it makes it go off. But I actually am really bad at laughing at other people's jokes. So famously, if Richard would make a mega joke, I'd just be sat here like... You actually need Sam to laugh, otherwise it just makes him look shit, doesn't it? Even if it was a really good joke, you know. That's the way it is.
You can't leave your co-host.
No, you can't. You can't.
It's part of the show. But then, hey, maybe that is actually like the inside knowledge, right? For the Cornwall.
Dude, the best one ever. I know I've told this story by then, it was years ago, so fans aren't going to remember. The best one of all time is there was this whole thing. Oh, I can't even remember what this silly in-joke was. Oh, fuck, I'm trying to remember that. There was some silly in-joke we had, right? Where it was like, do you remember this? Where it was something to do with Team Liquid. It was like, Team Liquid, Squazed. You know, there was like some weird thing we were doing with the name like that, right? So anyway, something like, you know, EZPZ, Liquid Squeezed. That was it. You remember? There you go.
Okay.
I've nailed it. So we made like a shit tag on that. And what happened, it was one of those things people just kept saying in the green room until it morphed into that, right? It went from like easy peasy lemon squeeze to like the CSGO one to like EZPZ, Liquid Squeezed or whatever. And it was about, I think it was like a Henry G joke or some like in joke, right? And so we once did a desk where Richard tried to like bring the in joke up thinking it'd be funny, and he goes, I guess in the end, Thorin, you could say it was EZPZ, Liquid Squeezed. And all I did, right, is I just looked at him and I just went, what does that mean though? Even though it was like an in joke we've been doing for months and months. And I have just completely dropped him in it like a cunt, as though like it's just made that up on the spot, even though I knew exactly what he meant by it. Because unfortunately, to me, it was funnier that he just looked stupid, didn't he? Because that just looks like, what are you talking about? You know, it was actually like a real. I know. Listen, part of me even felt him more like a bit of a prick. And I'm like, it's too funny. That's the problem. I felt like it deserved it in the moment. It's harsh, it's mad harsh. I will say.
You got your order for the fast
food. Exactly.
This is what you get, you fucker.
Oh, fuck. That's what used to be like for Richard Bisk. That was his life. Yeah, exactly. It's good on, isn't it? I know. It's not
I can picture Richard as well, just looking at you like dead belly.
No, dude, he had that look behind his eyes, like motherfucker. Like, but obviously he can't. Like, he's already wasted time with his shit. Joke hasn't worked. He has to move on at that point. Like, what can you do? Oh, you just done, aren't you?
Man, I can picture the Richard.
Oh. It was quality. It was a quality band.
Dude, that's solid. That's quality bands right there. All right, shit. Well, who do you think? Well, I mean, I guess this is going to come out, I think, before
I hope so.
Finals. Do we want to just like give a prediction? Who do we have taking it then? Is FaZe good enough? Because they've got three of the fucking. They've got like FaZe are. It feels like they're peaking right now. They're looking really solid. Simple is always at the top. He's always the top rated player in the tournament, no matter what. He's just a god. So I mean, like, who do you have taking it? Who do you have winning this best of 5?
See, here's what's interesting for me is, even though fans obviously all assume I'm like biased to Carrigan and FaZe is the best team, blah, 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 but what they're going to miss is this. I was the guy who actually was the most appropriate, in my opinion, when FaZe won those tournaments this year at the beginning of the year, because I would never say, you know, it's like they're just dominating everyone, no one can play them. I would always say they're winning close games, guys. Actually, what I love about FaZe, I always say, is that they're anti-choke. They just come through all the clutch moments. Now, after the major, they obviously had this 2 or 3 land slump where they didn't do that, where they were playing shit, they were getting knocked out. People like Rops would just have an average tournaments. Like, none of those magical qualities were happening. This tournament, mate, it looks like they're back. This looks like they've around the clock back to the major. Even Rain's popping off. All the stars are going off. They're winning pistols again. The map pool looks good. So the key thing for me is this. Because the finals are best of 5, I actually think that it favors FaZe, because FaZe has a pretty legit map pool. They've even worked on it a bit more. Like, there's maps you can pick into FaZe they can beat you on. Like, you pick Mirage or Overpass and them, they might just beat you on them, mate. They've got a pretty solid map pool in general. They can play the Ancients of the world if they have to. So for me, the key thing is, the reason it's going to be a brilliant finals matchup if these two teams play is because you've got a classic stylistic mismatch. So you have the team with the most insane firepower, maybe ever, by the way, Na'Vi. Like, I don't think you'll ever see a team that can have like 3 players pop off identically at the same time. That's impossible. So the good thing is that can beat any team if you do it right. But I'll tell you what, if you wanted a team to beat someone like that, obviously you're not going to outshoot them. You've got to have the team that wins all the clutches, mate. You've got to have the team that gets all the edges, that when they do get the guns, they make something with that round. They're not going to dominate. They're going to like squeeze a close game out. So I slightly favourite FaZe because I just think they're the best at that quality in Counter-Strike right now. For me, they're the team that in the big pressure game, they're still the most reliable for me. Whereas with Na'Vi, it's about firepower. They just have the craziest firepower, and that can, even though in theory in Counter-Strike we're supposed to say it's not about shooting people in the head, when you have this many people who are good at shooting people in the head, basically the analogy would be like football, like soccer similar. In theory, soccer's more about just scoring. You know, it's about like possession and the tactics. Now you build up from the defense. But at the same time, if you have a team that has 3 of the best strikers in the world and you each score 20 goals a season, you are going to dominate. Right? You're just going to win games from scoring goals. So to me, it's in Na'Vi's hands. If Na'Vi play lights out, they can win this tournament. Yeah. I think FaZe has sort of like the stylistic edge on them, in my opinion, just slightly. And also, Na'Vi has to stand in still. They're still integrating a guy into their team. No one knows how that's going to work out long term. We can't know. It's working amazingly so far, I will say.
What I love to see, excuse me, I'm still recovering from the laugh. What I love to see is just how well Electronic is taking the reins of the team as the IGL under Blade.
Oh, for sure.
This is years in the making. And when Na'Vi started making noises about cutting off the Russian players and like, oh, we're not going to have this, I got really nervous because I've talked about this.
Most people thought it was Electronic. We all did, I think.
And I've talked about this in the past in the sense that Electronic is Blade's protege. He is the guy who Blade has taken under his wing for years. They are on the same page with how they look at CS. Blade is basically just, it's like I don't know.
Well, people forget, Samler, they
martial
actually
arts master.
they did do this last year. Do you remember? I think it was like DreamHack or something. There was one event they did badly. It was either DreamHack or Pro League. And actually, Flamey said in the interview that they'd been letting Electronic call at that event, but that was like a one-off. I think they just tested it at that time. But as you say, the writing was always on the wall of it. Like, this was something planned a long time ago, as far as we can tell.
It's weird. It's like Kerrigan is such a good in-game leader that it takes two minds. You have to gang up on him a bit. And so it's going to be the question of whether or not Blade and Electronic can be on that same wavelength and figure out how to beat Kerrigan, because I know that Kerrigan is the IGL.
Dude, no one even gives him credit for that. That's how much I get it. Like, listen, part of it, in my opinion, why Kerrigan gets flamed isn't just not winning. It's if you're ever one of my favorite players, you just always have to take a beating from shit fans. You know, it's like Device had to take it for all those years, Nico, etc. Sure. Spoiler: these are all the greatest players of all time. I've got an eye test like a motherfucker. I'm not like old school Skadoodle. I don't miss. So, especially not when it matters. Right. So the point I would make is this: dude, Kerrigan should get extra credit for winning that major. Because remember, his coach was banned. He had to use that analyst guy. Like, dude, we've all just spent years singing Zonic's praise for being a coach, and then Extase and Vitality, and then Malik and GT, and then a guy goes and wins the major with basically no coach. You should get like double credit for that. That's amazing.
Yeah. It's that, like, Kerrigan is in a league of his own when it comes to the IGL.
Yes.
Like, he really is just a head and shoulders above the rest. That said, it's still Blade. It's still just, I mean, he has lived and breathed CS for how long now? 20 years? Like, he's been around since the start, basically.
Oh, he's one of the most OG people of all time.
He is one of the most OG
He genuinely would have started in esports nearly when I did, by the way, early 2000s.
Yeah, he knows everything about Counter-Strike.
Yep.
And so it's a question of like how well he's been able to inculcate that into his team, Electronic. I mean, now it's been enough time for the core of Na'Vi to really buy into the system as well.
And they have as well. You can see, dude, they definitely play the way he wants. Like, they all get it as well. That's the coolest thing. When Boomich left, I wondered, like, look, even if he wasn't like the true IGL, I'm sure he had some responsibilities. It doesn't look like they've missed a beat. Everyone else just plays properly still.
I don't think that it's like, I really think it was Blade calling the show.
I do as well, yeah. I think they just normally had to have someone who made the initial call at the beginning of the round or something. Yeah, exactly.
They had to have somebody who was the front man and who was going to like take that role. But like, I think when push came to shove, it wasn't necessarily Boomich calling the shots. It was Electronic or Simple or Blade, and then Boomich was there. But like, I don't see it.
And by the way, for anyone who thinks like I'm just riding the FaZe train, it's not easy to fucking predict against Prime Simple when he's like the best player in the fucking world. Like, normally I don't do that. I normally just pick like the fucking super god and let him carry the game. But that's the other factor, because it's a best of 5.
Yeah,
it's also really hard to 1v9 a best of 5. So like, even if Simple's really good, he needs his teammates as well in this one.
It's a marathon. It's a totally different game. It's a totally different game. Like best of 5, it's got nothing to do with best of 3. Because all of a sudden, even if you win a 2-0, you got to win another map. You got to get your head into the game. So you're playing a best of 3 at least. And then that goes the distance at least.
Yeah.
And then if it goes to a 4th or 5th map, it's a totally different beast. I mean, just between these two teams that could go the distance as well, like, you got to be ready for a 7-hour grind fest. Like, this is just going to be brutal. So, which is kind of why I'm not the biggest fans of best of 5. You know, I think it can go too long. It changes the dynamics of the game too much to have it drag out that long, especially with how the game is played now. Where rounds really take their time. They take the maximum amount of clock time. A single map can last an hour, and it's just like, okay, it can go very long. It turns into a real marathon. That aside, it's not going to be it's really hard to call this one, because it's going to be the stamina between the players and whether or not Kerrigan, you know, is his brain going to start leaking out his ears because he has to think so freaking hard for so freaking long trying to figure out like what it is that Blade and Electronic are going to be playing. Because Blade and Electronic are going to have, at least on their T sides, you know, they're going to be prepared. They're going to have rounds set up. It's always in sequence. That's what's on those papers that the Na'Vi players have. You know, they build out halves, Na'Vi, and so that everybody knows what they need to be doing in each given situation. It's all planned out and written out. You can follow a game plan on Na'Vi side, and that might be an edge for them going into like really long-term, like marathon kind of games, because it takes a little bit of, you're not having to be innovative all the time. You can fall back a bit on a system, whereas Kerrigan may have to be a bit more of the innovator throughout the entire series, and that could take its toll. So, man, I think it's going to be a perfect grand final. I think they win both semifinals, and I think we get them in a best of 5.
I hope it's just a good game as well, because I actually also think this storyline, Na'Vi versus FaZe for the top spot, if this can be like a permanent fixture, like every tournament, this is one of the main story, it'll be an amazing area of Counter-Strike. Because the problem we're having, like I said earlier, is once you get past Na'Vi and FaZe, a lot of the other teams can lose too early. And it's making the narrative sort of shit, because what happens is if I beat you early in the tournament, right now you're supposed to watch my run and see what's my story. If I just then immediately lose myself to someone else who immediately lose to someone else, like there's no story there. It's just random teams facing each other and then you flip a coin, someone wins. You want it to be like this, like think about either outcome. Let's say FaZe wins it. Well, then suddenly FaZe is back and maybe they're number one again and they're going for the Grand Slam next. So now Na'Vi, if you're simple, you're mega motivated. But what if Na'Vi wins? Well, now you've properly been displaced if you're FaZe. Now you've got to get back on top. You've got to refigure things. Maybe figure out another map or something like that. The outcome of this final could be really cool for the rest of the year. This is the storyline we have to hang on to right now in the game. This is because here's the problem. Think of all those other years, Semler, where you had like Team Liquid Astralis, but one team wins all the time. You want like a true rivalry, like the one where it's the heavyweight match. Like you take my right punch, but then I get knocked out by you in the next fight, the trilogy. Like you want it to be like no one knows who's going to win, but it's going to be an amazing match.
That's exactly it. Yeah, you don't want it to be too predictable. And also there's like an element of redemption as well for Na'Vi and Simple. Like I hope that things really, like there is that side. It's like I kind of hope also is that it works out for them that they get a few more wins just because of how things have been going against them and all of this outside influence, pressure, everything, drama, everything that gets into it, that gets thrown into it, and the fact that they're still able to perform despite everything that's happening, it makes me wonder, like, are they completely unplugged from social media? Like, how insulated are they during these events to be able to just
they're doing a mega job. Yeah,
they're doing a fantastic job. I don't know if it's Blade who's insulating the players and making sure that they can just focus on the game, or if it's the management or what's going on there, but like they look rock solid. They look terrific.
I even think that angle's been mega oversold, by the way. Obviously, we can't know how they're affected because we're not in their life experience.
Not, no.
But here's the difference. Because famously, that whole conflict began literally on the weekend when we had the Katowice playoffs. I remember watching the game they played then, and they did look different in that game. So like that actually did look like Simple was fucking a bit shook. The team didn't perform. Ever since then, I think they've played normal Counter-Strike. I mean, it's impressive because they obviously all had this weighing on their mind and there's all this uncertainty. But actually, the Counter-Strike I've seen them play eye test, I think they've actually been able to hold up. They played some brilliant Counter-Strike in these months.
Yeah, they certainly have. It's so good, man. We are spoiled. We are so spoiled by how competitive it is right now. And just looking at this bracket as well, you could look at this bracket and how it's played out with Cologne and say, oh, well, this was like, what kind of what do you mean movie star riders in the quarterfinals? It's like, no, they, like you pointed out earlier, like they earned it. They beat G2.
They beat Vitality
twice in 2 best-of-3s. Like they are not a joke team that just kind of fluked into this situation. I mean, these are all savages. Astralis are on the up and are bouncing back, it looks like. I mean, they take Furia 2-0. They beat Cloud9 2-0. Cloud9 are no joke. That's a
just
team
won a tournament.
Yeah. Everybody's proud to be able to take down Cloud9. Those guys are total savages. So Astralis as well find themselves in a position where it really works out for them, and like we can actually see whether or not they're going to be able to do it. I mean, all sorts of cool storylines in Cologne. So I'm stoked that we actually get to kind of live through the playoffs now and really enjoy it for the next 3 days. I'm really curious to see what the production is going to look like as well from ESL. I feel like they damn well better pull all the stops out for this one. This has to be the crown jewel of their tournament circuit. So I really hope that the stage and the production and everything, they've had 4 days to prepare, at least on the spot. Not like they haven't been preparing for months leading up to it with stage design and everything. But I am looking forward to that reveal to see what the stage looks like and everything.
Right. I reckon what we do is this. There's only been like a handful of questions because we've got a new channel also on the Discord for specifically by the numbers questions. So I say we do a few viewer questions, and then we wrap it after that.
Hit it.
What I'll do is I'll take them and I'll put them in the chat here so you can see them all.
Yeah.
I think in theory we're supposed to read the username, but it's up to you if you want to do that or not. Right, let's see. Yeah, here we go. I'll just put them into the chat here. Wait a sec. Just go in whatever order you want. And if you think one's shit, you can skip it, but there's not that many. I would maybe just do them all. We'll see how much.
Pounder 420 classic.
Go on, then read out the question.
What's your favorite story from the Bible?
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
This is a good one because here's the thing. I did purposely get them to set up that channel so there wouldn't be all the questions that were also for Monty and Richard for the other shows. Like, obviously, this is one you can answer because maybe people know. I think people might know if they follow Semmler's stream. Semmler's into like Christianity and Christian apologetics, etc. So it's not like we're just talking about shit we remember as kids. So obviously we're both going to answer these questions. Let me think. What would my favorite story in the Bible be?
Yeah, my favorite story, the one that I've been thinking about actually recently, especially when things got rough, was Job. You will just endure everything, and it's all a gift from God. And so don't take anything for granted. Like it's a good, bad, everything. And also just a reminder, it's like you came from dust and you will return to dust. And so keep that. It's a bit of a memento mori, I don't know, kind of a stoic point of view as well, where it's just like, just remember, like you had nothing coming into this and you're not going to have anything coming out either. And so really you should just be focusing on God and focusing on trying to be good and trying to really, keep orientated, keep your orientation correct. Right. And so that's probably where I'm at right now. At least I was reading it not too long ago again.
My favorite, actually, it's one that, funnily enough, I remember the famous psychedelic sort of author and discoverer Terence McKenna used to talk about, but I have a similar position. It's the story of doubting Thomas, the disciple in the Bible, who he said he didn't believe it was Jesus that had been resurrected into the upper room, right? Because here's the angle I take on it that maybe other people won't, right? In theory, here's what's funny. That's often used in the modern day by very literal Christians who are fundamentalists as a story about not having faith. The idea there is he didn't have enough faith and he was sort of like, prove it to me, God. But here's what I think they've missed about the story, Semler. If that was the angle, then he would be told, like, go away, you don't deserve this. Instead, he was actually allowed, if you remember, he reached into the hole and he could feel the wound. And then he said something like, oh my God, it's you, Lord, or something, Here's the cool thing about that story. What it implies to me is the opposite, Semler. What it implies to me is this. If you're the guy who can just have faith with nothing, then you can do that. You can go ahead and do that. You can say you believe, you can do what they say. But if you're the guy where you essentially say, think about this, you say to the universe, to God himself, show me a sign, prove that this is real. You will be given a sign. That's the key detail there. You will be given it. That's the message that I take from that story. Because the problem is, Sam, I'm way more that type of person. I'm not I'll give you an example. When I was a child, for real, I was the person where I'm not just going to take it from you that, like, if I put my hand in the fire, it burns me. I'm going to have to do it myself. That's just who I am as a person. I have to sort of see certain things for myself, do certain things for myself, and then I'll know there's something to it. There's a vitality there. So for me, that's been my life in general, by the way, when I've been exploring things. I want to sort of like knock on something, test it's legit, feel it. Actually, you have to give me something. I can't just go off like flowery ideas,
Totally. There's a story that I was just listening to the other day. Nabil Qureshi, who was his book, he wrote a book, he passed away, but he wrote a book before he passed away that was like Searching for Law and Finding Jesus. Okay. And how, he eventually along those lines, had to eventually just say, like, I need proof. Like, there's so much on the line if you convert in that sense. Like, he's like, I need proof. And he got 2 dreams. And even after getting the 2 dreams, it still took him months to finally convert and like really make it up. But like, he's a fantastic guy and interesting guy as well. I'd recommend if anybody's like curious, right, and wants some arguments or at least a different take on things, like, to look him up. There's a lot of, he's got stuff on YouTube and all that sort of thing. So, but unfortunately, well, I don't know, he's passed now, so there won't be anything more in that sense. But his story is a really interesting one, and I recommend it. All right, what are we? Where else?
Just keep going.
Yeah,
there's only like 6 or 7 of us, man.
Do you have a goal in esports that you haven't achieved? To do this.
Here's the problem
right now.
I don't have like a major one, as in like, I don't have something like do a CSGO major. Like, I'll give you an example. Sometimes people naively think, because I do so much talk show work in League of Legends, that my dream's like work at League of Legends event. If people don't know, I've told this story publicly. I had Riot Games back channel. They wanted me to work Worlds. They didn't want me to, Semler. They just said if I didn't talk shit on them for 2 years, they'd let me work Worlds. It's like, first of all, your terms are not acceptable. And 2, I even told them, I don't need to work your fucking shit Dota clone World Championship. You do know I've done like 7 of these motherfuckers in CSGO. This is at the time when I've done 7, obviously. So like, that angle was never really going to happen. So I don't really have a goal like that. I would say my goals are smaller things. Like, for example, with this company, I hope I can get the funding to do documentaries I like, just things that essentially what I want to do, Semler, my goal for this company is, it's more just the idea of having like a bankroll to do what I want to do elsewhere. So for example, instead of having to go to like a TO, like an ESL, and go, here's why you should do this skit or this video, I'll just do it myself. I'll have my own editor, my own cameras, we'll just film it, we'll put it on the fucking internet. I don't need anyone's permission anymore as long as I have the funding. So that's my only real goal now. It's like more small things that I want to just, instead of complaining and telling someone else, do it like this, I'd rather I just have the chance to do it myself, and I'll show you how I want it doing, like I did with some of the Flashpoint things.
I think that's definitely like because you and I have both done all the big events. We've all like, I've casted on TV now. I've gone as high as I can go in terms of casting and let's say part of the show. So it's like, if I have a goal that I haven't achieved, is to do something exactly like we're doing right now, because Room on Fire kind of fell apart for a variety of reasons. It just wasn't the right time. There was all sorts of stuff going on. Like it kind of slipped through my fingers that one. I feel like we could have done something there and we didn't. And that's definitely on me. But like to do something like this, where I just get to work with guys that I want to work with, create cool content, have fun, and not be beholden you know, to others where I have to hold back on what I say. Like if I can express myself honestly, I'd be very happy with that. So I feel like that's the goal now, is to find a way to be able to do that going forward, rather than be beholden to others and be on that tournament circuit where you're always walking on eggshells, not knowing if you're going to be hired again, and that's the end of it, right? That's the end of your career. I definitely want to try and figure out a different way.
Dude, you know what angle I'll also never get credit for, because sadly, whenever you're successful, I've noticed in life, people who don't know how you did it just think it was easy, or like, it's just obvious, let's go that way. So people really think, right, that I just trash talk because I like to hurt people's feelings. They don't know, like, I am just human, you know. You think it's not awkward when I just like trash the fuck out of some legendary player, and then on that night we all go back to the hotel and I have to walk to where Semler's sat, through tables featuring these players and their best friends. Sometimes their families are there, for fuck's sake, and they've just seen me just trash this guy. I have to still do that, but here's the point. That's called having integrity. Like, I am going to say what I really think, no matter what, for the fact it's going to be awkward. Like loads of people people don't know, loads of analysts won't say it for exactly that reason. If you want to know the real reason the analysts don't go in on Imperial, it's because they don't want what I just had on Twitter. They don't want someone in real life they don't want Fur's brother coming over and having a word with you or whatever. Notice how they never come and have a chat with me. It's weird. It's always like little skinny 19-year-old Danish kids you all are fucking picking on. Weird how that works. It's funny, just stay away from me, isn't it? Yeah, well, maybe you know which way your bread's buttered. Next question.
Henoda, if the current iteration of esports was to fail, VC and the Saudis get tired of it, and the current companies mostly go under, could a new esports scene come and not be corrupted in the same way?
Okay.
I don't think so. I think that human nature is fallible, and so you're eventually going to wind up in the same spot, because it feels like there were opportunities to learn, and people, the money, you know, it's just like, well, okay. Oh, man, that's a tough one. I'm just thinking, actually, like the first thing that jumps to mind is like ESL and FACEIT. Like ESL, I don't think had any choice. MTG owns them, and so it's just like, yeah, you're getting sold because we're done with it, right? So DreamHack and ESL, that tough noogies, that's the way it goes. I wonder for FACEIT. I feel like FACEIT had more autonomy, because I don't think that they had any VC or anybody pulling their strings. That was just a decision that they had to be okay with making, that they were going to join up with ESL and then join in on this. So I think people eventually, you know, it's like if the money gets big enough, like what's your cutoff point? And it's easy for us all to say, oh, well, in that situation, that's exactly, I know exactly how I would act. And it's, you know, that's why another reason why I was like, fair enough, when this thing happened, when this news broke, I was like, okay, I don't know what would happen if somebody showed up knocking at my door saying, hey, I have $100 million. Do you want it? But it's going to cost you, you know, your company or whatever. I mean, $100 million is a lot of money, right? Like, what are you going to do in that sort of scenario, right? Of course, in your mind, you want to think, oh, of course I'm going to say no, or I'm going to slam the door in his face and kick him down the stairs or something. Like, you don't know how you're going to react in that sort of situation. So I don't know. In that sort of scenario, I think that people are just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over again, because they don't remember the past. The past gets fuzzy, or there's too much money on the line, and the pressure is too much.
I would say the problem is I'm also a bit like you. I get the sense it always would have gone this direction, because I'll give you an example. In theory, the only reason these companies wouldn't sell out is if they didn't need the money, right, Semler? But the problem with that is even that doesn't work, because, for example, exactly the same Saudis that bought ESL and FACEIT also bought Newcastle United Football Club. Well, spoiler, in football, there's loads of money. So if anything, what that means is I don't think you can win either way. Like, the reason these people can buy into esports, by the way, is they don't need to turn a profit. They've just got essentially unlimited resources. And in this particular case, if you're a fan and you really don't get this, the whole reason to buy the company is to directly associate it with an evil regime. You are trying to sports wash what otherwise would be horrific to people by creating a positive association with a football team they like, with a video game product they like. You are trying to actually, that's why when people go, why don't they put more layers of abstraction? Because that wouldn't achieve the goal. The whole point is this is advertising to make you think, maybe that guy's not so bad, the guy runs Saudi Arabia or whatever. So the problem I have is this. I think even if there was money involved, they'd still want to get in, and it just make it easier for them, to make it easy to balance the fucking budget. So I get the vibe eventually these entities were always going to buy into esports. In fact, the best case scenario was just that it was the American companies that aren't as directly involved with the evil regimes. Like it always was going to be the Amazons of the world. And by the way, some twat like Elon Musk might have bought in or something. Like it was always going to be people who probably had like the fucked up agenda and would have done similar things. My issue basically is I don't think esports was ever willing to live at a lower level. The biggest problem I've had with esports the whole time, Semler, is even in the early days when people like me and you came in, people always had that whole bent and drive of like, it must get bigger, it must be mainstream, I must get validation. So they were always eventually, I think, unfortunately, going to sell out. Whereas I always used to say, funny enough, at the end of CS 1.6, I remember saying to people, even though they didn't get what I meant, I remember saying, I'd actually be cool if esports didn't get that much bigger than this. I mean, by the way, I made way less money back then, but the difference was it was way more pure as a sport back then. There wasn't any of this nonsense. It was just the best players in the world. They made just enough money that they could be like a niche sport and just go like a jiu-jitsu player or something. If you're not the best in the world, you don't make so much money doing that, but you just love jiu-jitsu, so you just do that as your shit. And your gig is, as long as I have the money to make a living doing this, perfect, I'll keep doing it. Let me see how I do in the competition. Whereas I have to say, the competition's got a little bit better and the stages got bigger, but in my opinion, what we had to give up to get that, now it seems like a Faustian bargain, doesn't it? Like, what have we ended up with? We've sort of sold the whole scene out.
Yeah, that's the issue when you get the money involved. It's but that's always, it's as soon as you get the money involved, money does things to people. It's because the real problem, I've noticed it happens a lot. Most of the topics people talk around in circles, hours and hours and hours and hours, they actually stem from like cultural things in wider society that we can't fix because they're like how culture operates. So I'll give you an obvious point to make here, Semler. It's like what I was sort of saying earlier is, to me, there are more important things than money. That's not at all the vibe I get from the majority of people in esports. For most people in esports, the hierarchy of values is money is number one. They'll even use it, by the way, in what I consider a really, quite frankly, disrespectful and an inappropriate way. Like people like Frankie will be like, I've got to earn a living. No, you don't. You do not have to live in like southern fucking UK in some ball of a place that you've bought for yourself with your you do not have to do all that. Don't make that sound like you're fucking Aladdin stealing a loaf of bread to feed your family. That is a totally inappropriate example, because that is not that you're hitting the threshold to live. You're hitting the fucking threshold where you're getting like the top tax rate, you fuck. Like in that scenario, you're just saying money is my God. When I have a value and I have money, when I weigh it up, if the money's more, money wins. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying I'll give up the money. If people don't know, for this company that was set up with Richard, I turned down hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment for this because I don't want it to come from people who are literally murdering people right now. That's too on the fucking nose for me. At least give me, like I said, at least give me the reach round of fucking 4 layers of abstraction. At least make it where I don't have a say in it, as in like this company bought that company, bought that company, bought that. Well, at that point, you can't do anything again. It's just money at that point. It's just that's the problem I have, is I do get the vibe as a wider cultural point. It's like you said earlier, when you say that line, like if someone came with $100 million, here's what's sad. People, even as a joke in bars, do that. How many millions would they have to pay you to suck a dick? It's like, that's it. Yeah.
Why would the money ever be the factor on that one? I've always thought that was weird, you know, like that's the angle I never got. Whereas they're just like, they're actually like calculating. You know, it's like going, well, for 1 million, like bloody hell, what is this? What equation is going on in their brain? What is the GIF in their mind? You know, the pi sign.
Everything has a price. They've been taught like everything has a price. Yeah, everybody has a price, and that's just the way it's going to be, right? The only difference is that in this sort of scenario, it's not like let's say straight up corruption where it's just like, oh, you plata or plomo or something like that, right? Where you get it's silver or lead, and either you take the money or you're going in the ground, right? It's not that dire.
Oh, exactly.
It is very much like you take the money or maybe you go find another career. You know, but it's like no, that's as much as dying. Which
is a totally honorable thing to do. Yeah, just go elsewhere and do something else without evil fucks. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. I mean, we could have a long discussion on that topic. Could a new esports scene come and not be corrupted in the same way? I don't know.
Maybe not in the same way, but sadly it would be corrupted. Like just look at the world in general.
I think human beings are fallible. We're flawed, and that's just the way it is. You got to accept it. Do you not strive against that? Of course, but it is going to be the uphill fight.
I'll even say this, in my opinion, the reason why money is what enables so much evil in the world is because the genius of money is it's an abstraction. So what it means you can do is you're just making a business deal, but it actually means these people in this country die. It actually means these people in this country starve. It means that this company goes bankrupt and everyone loses their jobs and their livelihoods. They get depressed, they commit suicide. That's the problem with money. The genius of it, Semler, was this. It made everyone a mafioso boss. Because the genius of being the mafioso bosses, you aren't at knife range having to actually stick a shank into a guy and watch him bleed out and fight him. You just tell a guy to do it. In fact, when you get to the top level, you don't even tell him, do you? You just go, he needs to disappear. And just saying disappear means a man dies. And even though, and essentially, you've set in place a chain of events that murders a person, you don't feel like you did. You don't have the same bad sleep. Well, if you're a moral person, you would, but these people don't. You get to have a level of distance that you don't actually get to feel the consequences. That's what I feel like we've done now. Because basically, every one of our colleagues has made these decisions. They've sort of just said, it's just money, isn't it? Oh, it's too abstract what that means, though. So I'm not the one doing it, and it means they can take the money.
All right, next one. Mini idea. Why is asking, what is your moral philosophy, a moronic question compared to asking, what is the fundamental principles that your moral philosophy is built upon?
Right, here's the thing. Initially, that sounds like a bit of a hipster, like you're trying to be 500 IQ, but I think I know vaguely what he means, which is when he says, like, why is saying, like, what is your philosophy as opposed to what the principles are? I don't know what he means, but essentially, it's like, I would tie it into what I said earlier, which is I don't just say, like, I follow this approach. I could just tell you what my principles in life are. Like, I do not lie. I always fucking honor contracts I make. Like, these are things, by the way, I don't then need to go, yeah, but I don't like that guy, so I won't honor a contract. No, my principle is I honor contracts. So that means, by the way, even when it's people like Flashpoint who are fucking me over, I do all my job until the contract ends. I do what I've said I will do. I famously, the one I've always hated, Semler, is all those fuckers at events who are like, nah, I'm feeling a bit off. I can't do this game. I agreed to do this event, mate. You pay me my day rate. I will do that match, as I have done. If my family just died or if I'm sick myself, I will just do that match because I come from a world where you don't make money like that frivolously. That's big money. That's fucking enormous. And I've got a responsibility. I've agreed to do this thing. So to me, like, that's a main issue. So I think I vaguely get what he means, but it's a bit of an out there question, isn't it?
It maybe just be like, is it just trying to say that there is a building block? Like, what is the building block that that decides it? So is it modern morality? Is it modernism? Is it Christianity? Is that what he's trying to get at in terms of, like, what's the building block?
See, that's what confused me, because I thought the way it was phrased was he was sort of asking the difference between someone who says, I'm just in this group, and someone who not actually knows what that means. You know, what does it,
right.
what are the fundamental, what are the fundamental principles of charity, or how you should treat people, or
okay, so are you a default, it's like, are you a default something, or have you actually tried to ask the questions Socratically, like try to get to the bottom of, like, what your fundamental principles are?
I'm guessing that's what he means.
That must be it. And that must be, like, why. I mean, okay, I actually recently listened to somebody like that who's, how they came out of the cave was that they actually had honest people asking like questions honestly. Why do you think that? Why do you behave that way? Why do you, and honestly doing it, and not dishonestly, or, trying to mislead, or trying to, just like actually honestly asking those kinds of questions allows somebody to start developing those fundamental reasons why. Like, why do I think this way? Why do I behave this way? Why am I not on board with this? Like, I was on board with it up until that point, and then I started asking questions, then all of a sudden I'm not, and I'm actually going the other way. I guess that's maybe what you're getting out there. I hope we've reasoned.
Whatever. He got his money's worth on that one.
Archives of Justinian. What superpower would help a CS pro the most? What superpower would help a CS pro the most?
I mean, the problem with that one is I feel like the most obvious answer is probably just like speed, because if you had the fastest twitch muscle memory ever, then you'd obviously just have the most perfect accuracy or whatever, wouldn't you? You'd think. Yeah,
for whatever reason, I just thought an infallible memory. So if you could remember,
that's a good one too. If you could remember every demo, you could pick up a lot.
You could remember every round. You could remember every, like, oh, this is what's happening right now. Okay, he did that 3 rounds ago. Now we know.
Thing is, though, if we're going Super Bowl, you can go more ridiculous. The obvious one, telepathy, just read the mind.
Yeah, but basically that's the other one.
Pretty good.
Exactly. Just like, where are they going?
And obviously the joke would be, here's what the joke would be, is you'd be reading their mind, and then all of a sudden, like, Carrigan's voice would go in your mind. You go, what's that? And you go, oh, you didn't know I was here the whole time? that would be the gangster, wouldn't it? There you go. So that's how he's doing it the whole time?
There it is.
Like the Prestige or something. Yeah, you're trying to figure out how he's doing it.
There it is. All right, perfect. I was already here.
Exactly. I was wondering when he would show up. Like Moriarty or something.
You have awoken. Oh, that would be sick. What a dream. All right, BZ, what is a moment you would immortalize in a graffiti that hasn't been already?
Here we go. Do you have a good one, by the way? Because I have one that I actually think is nailed on. I've never found anyone who disagreed with this. Because the first thing to point out, there's a couple of details you have to make here, which is the past graffitis are way less important than fans make them out to be, Semler. Like when they talk about that one where Olofmeister did
the Olofmeister diffuse or whatever.
He didn't even win that tournament, if people don't know. He didn't win that tournament.
Yeah.
Like people keep thinking it has to be like the moment that, you know, like, this is the guy that won the major and this is like his key moment, it has to represent who you know. It just has to be a super memorable moment. So I actually think I've got one, which is, in my opinion, the Astralis run at Stahlade Berlin when they played NRG in the semi-finals. They played Train, and on the pistol round, Device did that thing where he got 3 headshots with 3 bullets of his USP and he won the pistol round. Like instantly, like 1, 2, 3, like that. Like basically that's like a mega round out of nowhere. It changed the whole course of the game and they won the tournament off it. So like, my opinion, that's a great one. And you could also, by the way, it even ties into what the graffiti would be. You could have like a 1, 2, 3, or you could have like Device's gun shooting 3 heads or something. You could do a million creative aspects with sort of the aesthetic, you know.
Oh man.
Do you have a famous moment you think of?
Actually, the funny thing is that we mentioned Olofmeister, and it doesn't have a graffiti, but it has a sign. But the Olof boost,
I think that would be a good one too, because to me that was an enormous moment. Yeah,
it's the
yeah.
eye in the sky, you know, because he was just up there.
Sure.
But it doesn't have a graffiti, but it has a sign, you know. So that doesn't quite fly. I don't really actually have anything off the top of my head that I can think of that I would immortalize with a graffiti. There's too much. There's too much off the top.
Next question.
Yeah, next question. Yeah, sorry, I'm letting you down on that one. IWD. Now that Kerrigan has one, who is the best IGL to never win a major?
Obviously, he doesn't know the audience here, Semler.
I was about to say, let me guess. Do I get 3 guesses?
You can. I'll give you one guess. Who do you think my guess for who the best IGL in CS:GO to never? Who would you say, Semler? Who would be the first on top of your head?
Smiths. No, it's Existence.
It's obviously Existence. The joke is, and this is why I don't give a fuck. I'm shameless. I would have said it was Existence the whole time, obviously, wouldn't I? The joke is, I just get to look more legit now that Kerrigan's won. You know what I mean? Like, I was riding that one till the bitter end. You have to understand.
To be fair, I would have said exactly the same thing. I mean, Existence is the obvious one. It's such a tragedy, like the Titan. Oh man,
they missed a few. Time. Yeah, you know, there was a series they once did, Semler, in American sports. It was actually for the NFL. It was called Missing Rings. It was a great concept. It was like documentary series about teams that like they looked like they were locked to win the Super Bowl, and then like they didn't even make the Super Bowl final or something. You know, like that would be, if you did a series like that in esports. Like some of those fucking French teams are definitely in the mix. Because think about how crazy it was. People won't get it. The happy teams won the majors. The teams that the players respected more were the Existence ones. Like a lot of people don't know this. You know, to this day, if you do an episode, a talk show, and it's pros you're talking, not fans, to this day, they respect Existence and IGL. They still think like he could have done more, like he had bad luck or whatever, or didn't go the way. Like fans have been out on him for years because fans just do that thing where it's like, you choked the major, you suck. Like, but I noticed among like the actual pro community, he always had like a cachet of respect that he didn't have for fans, it seems.
100%. 100%.
In fact, didn't they even say it? If you can remember this, when they even left Existence, like they didn't agree with him as IGL style anymore. They always used to say in Envy, dude, if he ever quits being an IGL tomorrow, we'll hire him as a coach immediately. He can be our coach tomorrow, because everyone thought he had like the best mind for the game, you know. In fact, if anything, if people don't know, the complaints about Existence, actually a lot of them don't even fucking age well now. There were things like he wants you to practice too much and study the game too much and study everything like you're a pro and we're just playing a game.
It's just
like
because he had he was surrounded by French players.
Yes.
The culture is what got him. I mean, you listen to what Yakinder was saying, where it's just like, oh yeah, in Virtus Pro, we just like if he was in the CIS region, Existence would have just utterly dominated everybody forever, because he could have just been like, sit down, shut up, and you're gonna fucking do this, this, and this, like StarX or something like StarX when he was actually the IGL for Navi when he was really trying to make that happen. I mean, he had that same approach where it's like, this is what we're doing, and this is why, bam, boom, done. Existence could have had that same kind of he could have had that same kind of impact. Man, yeah, Existence 100%. I mean, just thinking like DreamHack winner 2013, running into NiP in the semifinals. If that could have happened in the finals, if they could have been on opposite sides of the bracket, just think what could have happened there. And then obviously the Cali may he like rot in hell, just utterly destroying that team right at the peak of their powers. Outrageous.
If I had to pick one other name, the only other one, because the problem is that one's a really obvious one to me. The only other name I could think of.
That's because we know each other.
Yeah, and so many years. The only other one I would say, even though people will get all butter, is MSL. And the reason I say MSL is this. Look, I know over his career, I'm not putting him in the category with Glaive and Carrigan. But here's the thing. Dude, for someone who's never won a major or gone deep in a major, he has won a lot of fucking tier 1 trophies. This guy has been in tons of finals. Remember, he has won trophies over like dominance. So again, if you're just looking at resume, he's someone who would be next on that list. Because the key thing about this question you have to realize is the timing of it's pretty good, because actually the last few years have seen a bunch of those guys, like obviously Zeus got his with Gambit, Carrigan got his now, like a whole bunch of people have finally sort of gotten their majors. So that list has gotten really short now, actually.
Shit, yeah, it is actually, because now that I'm thinking about it, it's like you bring up MSL, I'm like, that's a really solid addition. And now I'm trying to think like, okay,
who's better?
Who else would I put up there? And I can't really come up with a name.
Not many names, right?
Yeah, it's Existence for sure. I mean, Existence is the one that I'm always going to think of, period. There's going to be another 30 years of CS and I'm still going to be thinking, oh man, Existence, what could it be? Yeah, no doubt. All right.
Last question,
one.
isn't it?
Yeah, Snake Gold. What's the best CSGO tournament I should watch as a beginner? Cologne's
a pretty good one. I would just say the major. Let's be real. It's probably the major, isn't it? Just the World Championship, especially because the best thing is, because here's the key thing that makes the majors important. I've often made this point in CS 1.6, right? We used to call the big events like ESWC. We used to call them majors, but it was a colloquial term, right? It wasn't officially a major. But the reason it operated as a major, and the same in CSGO, is it's about what the players value as the major. So since the players themselves thought those are the most important events, the premise goes similar. If DreamHack Summer is a week before ESWC, I'm making up a random order here, you don't put all your practice in the DreamHack Summer. That's your warm-up event to win the ESWC. That's how you treat it. So in the same way, the reason why the majors, the tournament to watch, is because you know everyone there is trying 100%. It's probably even trying to peak for that event, and they're going all out to win. So you'll get a sense of who the teams are and how good they are.
Yeah, I think the major is probably the one to go with. And otherwise, it'd be big events like Cologne, like what were like the massive events that have really put on a show. Cologne, maybe like the Blast Fall Finals last year. That was a good event. And otherwise, I would just say, like, as a beginner, it may be nice for you to actually go back and watch some like top tier counter.
Yeah, watch a classic match. Yeah,
go watch that NIP.
Go watch a past NIP final. Something. Yeah,
go watch the NIP Very Games, the semifinals in 2013. See what CS:GO looked like at the beginning. You know what we were looking at then, right? And then you're going to come back in today and just be like, oh man, to give you some perspective of how the game played, but also how the game looked. And then you're going to be able to come over here and have like a totally new level of appreciation of what the game looks like and how far it's come. Because it certainly has made improvements over the years. It really has. So that's what I would say. Like, yeah, go back there. Like, I don't know, Columbus 2016. That was a sick major. Like Columbus 2016, that was a really cool event. You go watch that one. You know, like grab a playoff match out of there. Navi versus Luminosity in the finals, and watch that. Although that was a bit of a blowout.
It wasn't a great game, but whatever.
It wasn't a great
historical context.